Section 59, A History of the Inquisition of Spain, by Henry Charles Lay, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Breck. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lay, Book 8, Chapter 4, Part 3. Spheres of Action. Censorship. The next index was issued under the authority of Inquisitor General Zapata in 1632, forming a large folio. Then, in 1640, another appeared in a still larger volume, known as the Index of Sotomayor. 67 years elapsed before the publication of another, in 1707, under Inquisitor General Vidal Marin. Its preparation had been entrusted to Antonio Alvarez de la Puente and Fernando Gallego Calderon, the latter of whom died, and the work was carried to completion by the former. It contained not only the list of Sotomayor and the works of condemned and expurgated during the interval, but many others discovered by the industry of the compilers or by the revisers appointed by the various tribunals, under orders of May 31st, 1706, to examine all books, shops, and libraries. It occupied 2 folios of rather smaller size than the single one of its predecessor. The next index was issued in 1747 under the Inquisitor General Prado y Cuesta in 1 large folio. Its preparation had been committed to 2 Jesuits without supervision, who abused their position by gratifying the interests of the Society of Jesus through including a large number of authors who had never been condemned, giving rise to a long debate of which more hereafter. Although this index was thoroughly discredited, it was not until 1782 that the Suprema invited proposals for a new one. A memorial, apparently by a member of that body, in response to this, pointed out the inconvenience of the previous issues, with their constant growth rendering them costly and difficult to consult. The writer suggested the Roman Index of Benedict XIV as a model of all the works to be gathered into one alphabet, the long lists of expurgations to be replaced with the Roman Dana Corrigator, and a reference of the edict denouncing them. Allusion was made to the many intricate and delicate questions involved, largely owing to the irreconcilable pretensions of the Roman and Spanish Inquisitions, and to the conflict between the royal prerogative and the papal claims. Thus he says that the Roman condemnations were not to be regarded unless they emanate from the congregation of the Index, not the Roman Inquisition, or the papal brief, and even the congregation prohibited many books meriting no theological censure, because they were adverse to the assumptions of the Curia. Then there was the difficulty of the preserving an impartial balance between the rights of the crown and the power of the church, and of determining the numerous questions presented by many books, and the circumspection necessary to distinguish between rights and claims, between exterior and interior discipline, and between discipline and dogma. In fact, the construction of an index involved much beyond the mere definitions of theology, for it affected the large issues of national policy as well as the multitudinous interests of whole classes of society and religious organizations. As the writer said, the task was too great for any one man, however wise and learned. It could only be performed by a carefully selected junta. Most of these suggestions were adopted by Indice Ultimo, which appeared in the 1790 in a moderate-sized volume, easy of reference, although the absence of expurgations deprived the possessors of books requiring correction of the facilities afforded by the ponderous tomes of the older indexes. During the long intervals between the successive issues, the tribunals were expected to compile for themselves lists of the books condemned in the frequent edicts sent to them. In 1781 we find the Valencia tribunal taken to task for not knowing that a French translation of Robinson Crusoe had been prohibited by decree of January 16, 1756, and it was told that if it had not kept such a list, it must seek for one in some tribunal that they had done so. Booksellers likewise were expected to note all new prohibitions in the copies of the indexes which they were required to keep, and a decree of 1627 instructed the tribunal to furnish to them copies of all edicts as they appeared, so they could not plead ignorance and escape punishment. As regards the performance of expurgation, so long as the published index was merely prohibitive, it was necessary for the owner to deliver the book to the tribunal or to a commissioner to have the objectionable passages blotted out, and some documents of 1563 and 1568 show this to be the practice. When the expurgatory index of Quiroga appeared in 1584, we have seen that owners were empowered to do this and that they were negligent, which perhaps explains why the privilege was subsequently withdrawn. It was difficult to enforce obedience, and the duty was troublesome, leading to the expedient of licensing professional expurgators who were authorized to do the work and give certificates of its due performance, with the condition that, when working in libraries, if they found prohibited books, they would seize and deliver them to the nearest commissioner. When the books were delivered to the tribunals for expurgation, the habitual delays must have been exasperating. In 1688 we find Don Juan de la Torre, whose patience was exhausted, obtaining from the Suprema a letter to the Valencia tribunal ordering it to expurgate a book of his and to deliver it to him. We can scarce wonder that owners were negligent, as a remedy for which a Carta Acordada of October 5, 1712, ordered the tribunals to state in their edicts that the expurgations were on record there, and all owners were to send their books to have the offending passages blotted out by persons deputed for that purpose. Then in 1790 the owner was again permitted to do on one condition of presenting the book within 2 months, to show that it had been done, but as the indice ultimo gave no indication of the expurgations required, it was left for the owner to discover them. No matter what plan was adopted, expurgation rendered the ownership of books a source of anxiety and trouble, and exercised a deterrent influence on the diffusion of culture, for there was no class of literature, whether fiction, poetry, history, devotion, statecraft, law, or science, as well as theology, in which some lynx-eyed critic could not discover a phrase or sentiment which called for revision. Edicts were continually being issued describing the expurgation of individual books, sometimes 30 or 40 years after their publication, and frequently on the most trivial grounds, and the lover of literature or science had to be constantly on the watch to escape the penalties of neglect. The process of expurgation was the application with a brush of a coat of printing ink to the peccant word or passage, so as to render it perfectly illegible. When the Mexican tribunal took a notion to condemn all engraved portraits of the saintly Juan de Palafox, Bishop of Puebla, the face was thus dubbed over with ink so as to render the features indistinguishable. When in a book the length of the offending passage made this too troublesome, the ruder process was adopted of tearing out the pages regardless of the innocent matter thus removed and destroying the connection of the parts thus sundered. Literature was of small account to the butchers of books. Booksellers and book buyers were subjected to constant investigation conducted in the rudest manner, the influence of which could not fail to be most depressing. The examination of bookshops and public and private libraries, which we have seen attempted as early as 1530 and resolutely prosecuted in 1559, was a settled policy and was pushed with special vigor after the issue of every new index, but it was not limited to those times. The correspondence of the Suprema is full of letters and instructions showing the unremitting vigilance with which the work was carried on. In 1600, the tribunals of the Valencia, Barcelona, and Murcia were ordered to send to the Suprema the books of the Constable of Castile, a work of some duration, for, in 1602, there is still a box of them on the way. Then the Seville tribunal was instructed to examine the books of Fray Diego Davila and forward those which Montoya had indicated. Then the Murcia tribunal was told to send to Dr. Montoya the books of Don Juan de Joses. In 1602, the books of the confessor to the queen were ordered to be sent to the Suprema. All these were private collectors whose tastes or zeal for learning subjected them to these vexations and humiliations, to the unlimited detention of their cherished books, to loss from carelessness or pilfering, and to the irreparable damage of artistic bindings. The mere possession of books rendered the owner an object of suspicion and investigation. If this was the case with private collectors of all ranks, we can readily appreciate the endless troubles and ruinous prosecutions to which booksellers were exposed. In this same year, 1600, the Suprema advised the Toledo tribunal that Dr. Juan Martinez had been examining the bookshops of Madrid, resulting in the statement enclosed, as to which it was to do justice, the customary formula in prosecutions. This is merely an indication of the continuous warfare waged against culture and learning, from which no one was safe. In 1627, a decree commanded booksellers, under penalty of 40 ducats and excommunication, to report all prohibited books and those requiring expurgation which they might meet in private libraries. In 1618, the Seville tribunal was ordered to seize all the Hebrew books that had belonged to Arias Montano. Even the royal library of the Escorial was subjected to the most humiliating regulations. When the Index of 1612 appeared, the Geronimite prior of San Lorenzo petitioned the Suprema, stating the wish of the king that the prohibited books should not be removed or expurgated, as it was distinct from the convent library, and the only keys to it were held by him and the chief librarian. Thereupon the Inquisitor General sent Fray Francisco de Jesus to examine and report the arrangements of the library, after which, on November 12, 1613, it decreed as follows: all books which are literary and not religious or offensive, by authors of the first class, those of whom all the works were condemned, are to be separated, marked, and have a prefatory note that the author is condemned, but permission is given for them to remain where they can be read by the prior, the chief librarian, and the professors of the college. All books by such authors treating of religion and cognate matters, such as chronologies, sacred histories, and histories of the popes, seeing that the king does not wish them removed, shall be stored in a separate room, always locked as in an archive, and no one shall read them save the prior and chief librarian, by special license of the Inquisitor General and Suprema. There shall be 2 keys, locks, one kept by the chief librarian and the other by the Suprema, and 2 lists shall be made of them, one kept in a locked room and the other by the Suprema. With these shall also be placed 2 MSS by heresiarchs from the MS department. Rabbinical books and the Bibles in Romance can remain, but shall be put in a separate case and be marked as prohibited, but they can be read as hitherto by the prior, chief librarian, and professors. The fraile in charge of the pharmacy of the convent, but he alone can read books on medicine by authors of the first class. For distillation of quintessences and other matters of importance, a quarantine against the deadliest infection could scarce have been more carefully devised. There was a slight relaxation in this when, in 1616, Inquisitor General Sandoval was at the Escorial and extended to all the professors of the college the privilege of reading books of the first class on religion. After the Zapata Index of 1632 appeared, the question again came up, and Inquisitor General Sotomayor confirmed the arrangement of 1613. On the publication of his index in 1640, the frailes of San Lorenzo petitioned the Suprema that the library as belonging to the king should not be expurgated under the new index. To this the Suprema replied in a consulta to the king, November 16, 1641, arguing that as the library was the greatest in the world and belonged to the king, it was especially important that it should set the example of containing nothing contrary to Catholic doctrine. Still, there might be a secluded place in which all books by heretic writers and of evil doctrine could be set aside, and the key of it be kept by the Inquisitor General, on condition that the library should furnish to the Suprema whatever books it might need. There can be little doubt that some such arrangement was reached. The vigilant supervision over bookshops and libraries was unrelaxing, and the depressing influence which it exercised on the book trade and on culture in general can be estimated from the regulations accompanying the Index of Vidal-Marin in 1707. The tribunals were authorized to appoint an unlimited number of revisores de libros, empowered at such times as suited to them to examine the public libraries and auctions and bookshops. The revisor was to require from the booksellers inventories of stock, and to see that these were complete. He was to order sent to his house or to that of another revisor all prohibited books and those requiring examination, and report the result to the tribunal. He was to expurgate and certify with its signature all books requiring expurgation. He was to report all omissions or contraventions by booksellers of the rules of the index, and for this his inspections must be frequent. He was to familiarize himself with these inventories, and also with those which the booksellers were obliged to render to the tribunal at the beginning of each year, with details of all sales made during the year, so that he should become thoroughly informed and the booksellers be deterred from committing their customary frauds. All this was to be done at the expense of the owners of the books, or, in the case of public libraries, of the town. As this was expected to produce much dissatisfaction by licentious talk against the index, was to be reported for due punishment. The expected dissatisfaction was not lacking. The powers granted to the revisers gave so large an opportunity for oppression and extortion that the position was eagerly sought. Commissions were recklessly multiplied until the number of these literary spies and blackmailers aroused general complaint. Nor was this mere temporary abuse, for a letter of the Suprema, October 5, 1712, calls attention to the excessive number of appointees and the evils thence arising, for the palliation of which it proposed to issue an edict. This inspection of public and private libraries and of bookshops continued till the suppression of the Inquisition. We find June 25, 1817, the Seville tribunal sending to that of Madrid a list of books belonging to Juan Gualberto Gonzalez, royal fiscal in the Council of Indies, and on August 18th the fiscal sends to an unnamed tribunal the translation for which it had asked for a list of books belonging to the Marquis of Narros, the linguistic attainments of the inspectors having apparently been insufficient. In the financial distress of the Inquisition, the work seems now to be performed by officials of the tribunals, doubtless eager to do anything that would bring in fees, for in 1819 we have the report of the Secretary of Valencia Tribunal that, in the inspection of the bookshop of Pedro Juan Malien, he had found a sermon in Italian which he seized as suspicious, and which was duly submitted to the calificadores. End of section 59. Section 60. A History of the Inquisition of Spain by Henry Charles Lay, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Breck. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lay, Book 8, Chapter 4, Part 4, Spheres of Action, Censorship. Death afforded an opportunity not neglected of expurgating private libraries. When the owner died, the Inquisition stepped in to investigate and to control the disposition of his books. In 1651, it would seem that all books had to pass through its hands, for, in the case of Don Alonso de la Torre, the Suprema orders the Valencia tribunal to forward to it the packages delivered by the heirs, the prohibited ones separate for those approved. The instructions of 1707 apparently limit this interference to cases of sale, for they provide that when, on account of death or other cause, a library is sold, the bookseller must furnish the revisor with a list of all books and their prices, so that prohibited or suspected ones may be surrendered, for which the booksellers may take receipts. In 1748, the case of Dr. Teodoro Thomas, canon of the Cathedral of Valencia, indicates that the executors had to render to the tribunal a detailed statement under oath of the disposition made of all books and papers. The prohibited books were given to the Dominican convent, which had a license enabling it to hold them, and the rest were sold to Juan Bautista Malet and Manuel Cortes, booksellers. The papers were also accounted for. Those pertaining to cathedral affairs were delivered to the chapter, those which seemed useless were burnt, and the servants sold some to an apothecary. In this case, the necessary preliminary of submitting an inventory to a revisor had evidently been complied with. When this was omitted, the resultant trouble is exemplified in the library of Gregorio Mayans y Ciscar, the most eminent man of letters of his day, who died in 1781. His library was large and valuable, and his widow sought to make the most of it for his children. She was a pious woman, but through ignorance did not observe the requisite formalities. She sold a large portion to the Augustinian convent, which had a license to hold prohibited books, and when she learned that this was unlawful, she made great efforts to get it back. The Augustinians resisted, but were finally obliged to submit. When she applied to the Suprema for a license to sell the prohibited books, which was referred to the Valencia tribunal, it replied November 8, 1803, that the Augustinian provincial had prohibited the license, and had been told that the convent had a right to hold them, but the widow had no right to sell them. The inquisitor sympathized with her, but pointed out that to grant her request would open the door to fictitious transactions, and he recommended that at most she should be allowed to sell those which the Augustinians had bought, for there were others. The library was large. It had taken long to make an inventory, and still longer to find a revisor to go over it and note the prohibited books. This, however, had at least been accomplished, and the widow had been furnished with two lists, one of the prohibited books to be surrendered to the Inquisition, and the others of those which must be expurgated before she could sell them. The Suprema, before deciding, required to see a list of the prohibited books sold to the Augustinians, which was duly furnished, and we may hope that in the end the widow was able to dispose of her husband's books, although the proceeds must have been woefully diminished by the fees and the expenses and the confiscation of those prohibited. There was scant encouragement in Spain for scholars to accumulate the means of study and research. While this case was dragging along, irreprehensible zeal in pursuit of prohibited books threatened a foreign complication. Leonhard Schuck, the Dutch consul at Alicante, died, leaving the French vice-consul as his executor. The house and effects were duly sealed with the royal seal during the execution of certain legal formalities, but the commissioner of the Inquisition called on the governor to remove the seal and to deliver the keys to him, so that he might inventory the books, papers, and prints, for he was informed that there were prohibited articles of all three kinds. The governor refused until he could consult the king, when the commissioner at night broke the seal, made his way in, and compiled an inventory and replaced the seal as best he could. The Dutch ambassador complained to Carlos IV, and the minister Urquijo, who was unfriendly to the Inquisition, took occasion to issue a Carta Orden of October 11, 1799, severely rebuking it for this and other similar occurrences, which had contributed greatly to increase its evil reputation abroad. This supervision over the libraries of the dead continued under the Restoration. In 1815, orders were sent to all commissioners to see that no books belonging to estates were sold at auction until exact lists were submitted to the tribunal and its permission was obtained. And in 1817, when Fray Raimundo Garcia, prior of the convent of Montesa at Honda, died, the Valencia tribunal had his library examined with the result of finding quite a number of prohibited books, mostly of Jansenist character. Despite the ceaseless vigilance of the Inquisition, the seekers after forbidden literature took the risk of gratifying their longings. This forbidden literature was necessarily foreign. Under the preliminary restrictions on printing which weighed with such deadly pressure on authorship, and under such vigilance as which prompted the Suprema in 1602 to order the tribunals to instruct their commissioners to seize all new books of those of new authors or new editions and report about them without delivering them to anyone. It was impossible that native works of dangerous tendency could reach the public, and censorship was confined to theological subtleties or to trivialities. The only real danger to be guarded against came from abroad, and the Inquisition's most effective service to obscurantism was rendered to the quarantine which it established to preserve the nation from the infection of new ideas. To this were directed the unremitting energies of the state, which found in the Holy Office its most useful instrument. We have seen above how early it took the alarm in 1521. In 1532, the Royal Council adopted the heroic measure of prohibiting the importation and sale of all recently printed books, a measure which, if enforced, would have cut off Spain from all foreign literature, without preventing the introduction of heretical books concealed in packages of other merchandise. If not speedily repealed, it at least soon became obsolete, and the function of guarding the land from the importation of heretical matter naturally fell into the hands of the Inquisition, which alone possessed the authority and the ability to decide between what was innocent and what was obnoxious. This function consisted of two duties, that of separating the wheat from the tares in books regularly imported through the custom houses, and the suppression of smuggling. Precisely at what time the Inquisition undertook these duties it would be impossible to say, but its activity and organization of the work would seem to date from the Lutheran scare of 1557 and 1558. In a letter of May 12, 1558, from the Suprema to Charles V, it declares that all the inquisitors had been instructed to use the greatest vigilance at the seaports and along the French frontier, but such was the audacity of the heretics that this did not suffice, as was proved by the number of books daily seized in spite of the most rigorous punishment. So, in its report of September 9th to the Pope, it stated that to prevent the importation of heretic books, inquisitors with their officials had been established along the coasts and in places of the greatest trade, which was a falsehood from the purpose of obtaining papal sanction for despoiling the Church, since no new tribunals were established, though the existing ones were urged to special vigilance. How this was exercised is detailed in a letter of October 25th from Seville inquisitors, in response to an exhortation to diligence. They declared that all possible care was taken. Instructions had been given for the visiting of all ships on arrival. No merchandise of any kind should be discharged or opened without the presence of a commissioner, who saw that were no books in the packages, or, if there were, they were sent to the tribunal. All packages for Seville were sealed and not opened save in the presence of their inspector, to see whether there were books enclosed. All books arriving were delivered to the tribunal and examined. When those found to be prohibited or suspicious were detained, it had not come to their knowledge that anyone had received and distributed books without this previous examination. This shows that already the system had been established, which continued with little modification to the end. All packages of books were carefully inspected, those prohibited or subject to expurgation, and the new and unknown ones regarded as suspicious were removed and sent to the tribunal to await its decision, which usually inferred consultation with the Suprema and indefinite delay. Every package of merchandise, moreover box, bale, or barrel, was opened in the presence of the commissioner, in search of concealed books. Thus the whole importing commerce of Spain passed through the hands of the Inquisition, whose officials employed in business were unpaid except by the fees which they could exact from merchants, leading to interminable squabbles, insufferable delays, and grievous impediments to the commercial activity of the nation. The trade in books suffered especially. It evidently was regarded as a thing to be restricted as far as possible, and was subject to any caprice of the authorities. In the 16th century, orders were sometimes sent to special ports to forward all packages of books unopened, and finally this was adopted as a universal rule, the whole foreign book trade thus passing through the hands of the Suprema. A Carta Acordada of June 17, 1666, complains of the inobservance of these instructions, which must be obeyed by the commissioners at all the ports. The carriers must be bound under a penalty to return, within a fixed time, the receipt of the Secretary of the Suprema, and a separate letter of advice must inform the Suprema who he is and at what tavern in Madrid he is accustomed to lodge. No trade could be profitably carried on which was subject to such vexatious and costly interference, while the Suprema was constantly scolding the tribunals for their negligence. How their ignorant scrupulousness affected trade may be guessed by an incident occurring at Barcelona in 1666. A bookseller of that city imported a number of copies of a book just printed in Lyons, a Pharmacopoeia Medico-Chemica by Johannes Schilderius, M.D., physician in ordinary to the Republic of Frankfurt. In the Index of 1640 the inquisitors found, among authors of the first class, the name of Joan Schroederus, qualified as Philosophus et Theologus, German, Luther, in August Conference, all of whose works were condemned. They seized the pharmacopoeias and reported to the Suprema, which ordered a copy forwarded. It was duly submitted to calificadores, and 5 months afterwards the tribunal was notified that the books might be delivered to the owner. The internal traffic in books was trammelled by the closest supervision. In 1645 the Valencia tribunal was instructed to issue no licenses to take books to Castile without a formal order from the Suprema. While their departure was thus closely scrutinized, a second inspection was required on their arrival, as appears from a petition in 1665 of Juan Antonio Benet, bookseller of Madrid, representing that in 1663 he had forwarded to Miguel Paiso, a bookseller of Barcelona, certain books, among which the Barcelona tribunal found and seized a copy of the works of Quevedo, in 2 volumes, which he praised to be released, as was printed in Madrid, which it enjoyed free circulation. It was the same with exports. In 1573 the books of some frailes going to Canaries required a special order from Suprema to commissioners in Seville, Granada, Cordova, and Badajoz, to pass them if there were none prohibiting among them. The instructions of 1707 provided that, when books are to be exported, lists of them are to be submitted to the revisers, that they may retain any that are prohibited or unknown to them, and thus required examination. A transaction in 1788 shows that a special permit was required for each shipment of books to the colonies, and a royal order of August 8, 1807, prescribed that the examination should be made conjointly by the commissioners of the Inquisition, the royal revisor, and a delegate of the Juez de Imprentas. Even books in transit were subject to the watchful eye of the Inquisition, as we learn when, in 1560, some that had belonged to Cardinal Pole were shipped through Spain to Venice and were diligently investigated. Books, in fact, were regarded with almost an insane fear, as the most dangerous of all articles of commerce, and the more thoroughly that Spain could be prevented from knowing what men were thinking and doing in foreign lands, the safer it was for society. The regulations adopted for importations were well adapted to protect the Spanish intellect from such dangers. The requirement of sending all packages to the Suprema unopened seems to have been abandoned, but other obstacles were sufficiently onerous. All books with which the commissioner of the Inquisition was not acquainted had to be submitted to calificadores or sent to the Suprema for decision. As foreign books, especially the new ones, came under this category, the subsequent delays and the risk of prohibition exposed the importing bookseller to hardships rendering trade almost impracticable. Thus, in 1772, Pierre Crozier, a bookseller of Valencia, imported a copy of Essays de Morale of Pierre Nicole. It had to be referred to the Suprema, which, by letter of August 29th, ordered it to be examined and reported upon. After the lapse of 4 years, we find Crozier still begging the tribunal to decide whether it will be permitted, as well as copies of Discours de Fleury, the Histoire de la Bible of Rayamont. If prohibited, he asks permission to sell them to someone who holds a license or to return them to France. How much longer he had to wait we can only conjecture. These impediments to importation were aggravated by a regulation of the Royal Council in 1784, requiring a license before a new foreign book could be exposed for sale, and out of the small number on which the dealer could venture to try to market, he had, when applying for a license, to give 2 copies and to pay the examining censor a real per sheet for reading it, with the prospect that if the license was obtained, the Inquisition might subsequently prohibit it. The books seized were detained by the tribunals, and their fate is revealed in a letter from that of Valencia, July 28, 1798. In answer to orders from the Suprema to return to Don Joseph Joaquin de Soria a copy of the Lettres Provinciales in 4 languages, and to send to Madrid under seal the books brought from Holland some 10 years before by Don Pedro Antonio Casas, the tribunal explained at much length its inability to comply. The practice of entering the name of the owner in books seized is recent. The accumulation of prohibited books is large, and the room in which most of them are stored is so hot and so infested with bookworms that in a fortnight a book is pierced through and through. And those of Casas were placed there or left in their boxes, there would not be a leaf remaining. Besides, a bookseller was formerly employed to come monthly and dust them, and he carried away all that he wanted, as appeared in his prosecution on that charge in 1789. This explains why only a portion of Casas's books can be found. As to Soria's Lettres Provinciales, 2 copies of that edition have been found, but each has a different owner's name. Verily, the Inquisition was the graveyard of books. End of section 60. Section 61. A History of the Inquisition of Spain by Henry Charles Lay, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Breck. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lay, Book 8, Chapter 4, Part 5, Spheres of Action. Censorship. The outbreak of the French Revolution brought fresh activity and redoubled watchfulness for the exclusion of dangerous literature. Politics and religion were inextricably intermingled, and the revolutionary propaganda was as much dreaded as the religious had been in the 16th century. In 1792, the Suprema ordered all the tribunals to be especially zealous in preventing the introduction of the books, which the French were industriously disseminating for the purpose of exciting rebellion and imperilling religion and the monarchy. With this, it circulated a royal order commanding special examination of books and papers from foreign parts. Wherever there was a custom house, there were 2 revisers appointed, one royal and the other inquisitorial, who were to examine together all books and papers arriving. There were to be divided into 3 parts, those allowed currency and unknown works on history and science, which would be delivered to the owners, those included in the index to be retained by the inquisitorial reviser, and those unknown and suspected to be kept by the royal reviser until the king's pleasure could be ascertained. Thus the forces of the state and the Inquisition were marshaled together in defense of the faith and of the crown. Unfortunately, they did not always work harmoniously, for in 1805 these instructions were reissued with urgent appeals for cordial cooperation. It would be useless to follow in detail the numerous exhortations to vigilance in the succeeding years. In spite of the precautions, foreign ideas drifted through the custom houses and embodied themselves in the Constitution of 1812. And when the reaction came under the Restoration, the supervision of importations was confided exclusively to the Inquisition. In 1816, a question arose as to the functions of the subdelegado de imprentas and the revisor real, when Fernando VII decided that it pertained alone to the tribunals to decide what books should pass through the custom houses and that their permission was necessary. If these efforts to control the legitimate importation of books exercised an unfortunate influence on the intellectual development of Spain, its commercial interests suffered likewise from the precautions adopted to prevent the smuggling of the dreaded literature. These were known as the visitas de navios, which rendered the ports of Spain an object of dislike to all merchantmen, whether of native or foreign origin. Their systematization is attributable to the Protestant scare of 1558, when no means were deemed too radical which should serve to defeat the propagandist energy ascribed to the Spanish refugees and their heretical allies. When a vessel cast anchor before it could break cargo, it was visited by the representatives of various jurisdictions, health, war, and customs. Subsequently, health and war were combined under the name of almirantazgo, and there was added a visit from the commissioner of the Inquisition with this notary and alguazil. As these officials were unsalaried, they claimed to be paid for their time and for the expense of carriage and boat by fees exacted of the vessel. Then, after inspecting the crew and passengers and examining any books belonging to them, a guard was stationed to prevent the surreptitious landing of books. When the cargo was discharged, the commissioner opened and inspected every package, and if it was a bale of books, of course each one had to be compared with the index. For all this additional fees were charged, constituting a tax, not alone on the book trade but on commerce in general, deeply resented by all the commercial interests. Nor was the opposition lessened by the arbitrary methods of habitual with all the officials of the Inquisition. Complaints of abuses became loud and numerous from all the seaports, while, on the other hand, the frequent reports of heretical machinations led to constant exhortations from the Suprema for increased vigilance. Some feeble attempts were made to check abuses. In 1602, there was a prohibition that visiting officials should require to have meals served, should place guards, or insist on having salutes fired. In 1606, it was forbidden for commissioners to take with them notaries or familiars who were merchants, and who were thus learned the nature of the cargo and had opportunities to buy or to sell. But no attention was paid to these reforms. Then, in 1607, a royal cedula provided that commissioners should levy no fees for visiting ships, and this was repeated in 1610. But these commands were disobeyed on the plea that they passed through the Council of Castile and not through the Suprema, wherefore, as the letter said, the commissioners were bound to obey them, but not to execute them. The royal attention was finally called to the injurious effect of the system on Spanish commerce, and in January 1632 a cedula was sent to the corregidores of the seaports, in which the king stated that he had been informed that the continual vexations inflicted on those who came to trade at Spanish ports, arising from the abuses practiced by the numerous officials visiting their ships at their arrival and departure, had not only been the cause of the decline of commerce, but of its total destruction, for every vessel was visited by so many jurisdictions that the exhortations and impositions were great and had much increased of late. He was therefore obliged to inquire that proper methods could be adopted to encourage trade on the part of both natives and foreigners, without abolishing the necessary visits and precautions. There followed a list of searching questions as to the number of visits, officials, fees, methods, etc., with a request for suggestions. Although directed nominally to the abuses of all the jurisdictions, the Inquisition evidently was especially aimed at, for copies of the cedula were sent by the Suprema to all the tribunals of the Crown of Castile. A junta was assembled to frame a reform on the basis of the information thus obtained. It sat until the end of 1633, but if it reached any conclusions, they left no trace of legislation or practice. The only paper laid before it that I have met is a complaint from Don Pedro de Bereda, customs inspector of Guipazcoa, of the excesses committed by officials of the Inquisition, under pretext of visiting the vessels coming to the ports of his district. The probability is that, as so frequently the case in Spanish administration, the junta did nothing but submit to the king long consultas representing the conflicting views of the individual members, and that the king by that time had lost his interest in the matter and cast them aside without reading. As was inevitable, the aggressiveness of the officials led to frequent quarrels. In 1616 there was one in Sardinia, in which the inquisitor excommunicated the governor of Sacer, when the viceroy retaliated with a decree banishing the inquisitor. It was published with trumpet and cymbals, and so frightened the inquisitorial people that the consultors did not dare to assemble, and the familiars took to the mountains. The affair was referred to the Council of Aragon and the Suprema, which effected a truce by annulling the acts on both sides. That the junta of 1633 brought no harmony is seen in a similar outbreak arising from the same cause in 1634, between the viceroy and the Majorca and the tribunal, which had to be carried up to the king. In 1635 the royal secretary addressed the Suprema, stating that a squadron was being organized for the service on the coast of Guipuzcoa, and that, to avoid the extortions and vexations of the commissioner at San Sebastian, the king desired that the head chaplain of the squadron should be appointed as commissioner, so that he could perform the duty of visiting the ships and prizes when they entered port. To this the Suprema returned an emphatic protest. Such visits were essential and not to be omitted. The cause of complaint was not the extortions of the commissioners, but their zealous discharge of their duties. As there is no endorsement of the consulta, the king apparently did not press the matter. Perhaps the bitterest struggle was that carried on by Bilbao for more than 100 years. As one of the busiest ports of Spain, it naturally recalcitrated against the burdens laid upon its trade. The system had scarce been fairly organized when, in 1560, complaints already came to the Suprema of extortionate and illegal fees. Bartolome de Robles, a bookseller of Alcala, represented that he had imported through Bilbao 40 bales of books, which were forwarded in one lot by 10 muleteers. They had all been duly examined and sealed, the commissioner charging 1 real for each seal, and then, in place of giving 1 certificate for the lot, he made out 40 certificates at 40 reals apiece. The Suprema forwarded this to the tribunal of Calahorra, Logrono, with a table of fees, commanding that all exorbitant charges should be returned to it for distribution of parties aggrieved. It was not alone the booksellers, but merchants in general, who suffered from the opening of their packages and the fees charged on each, and the shipmasters exposed to the extortions attendant upon the visits. The mercantile community of Bilbao was well organized, having a Casa de Contratación to regulate commerce, with a fiel or executive officer, a prior, and councils. They made their grievances heard, and a compromise was reached with the tribunal. In 1561, which was not observed, it was the same with another agreement made in 1567, and yet another in 1576, under which all fees were abolished. To enforce this, the Contratación brought suit, resulting in an agreement of 1577, confirmed by the Suprema, by which the commissioner received 50 ducats a year in lieu of all fees, except 2 reals on each package of books, the examination of which was admitted to be laborious. Trouble soon recommenced. In spite of repeated exhortation to moderation by the Suprema, fees were levied on every package and cask of merchandise. The royal cedula of 1607 abolishing fees was published February 18th, but received no attention, and in 1609 Bilbao sent a strong remonstrance to the king, to which Logrono tribunal replied, asserting it to be false. The labor was great, it always had been and must be paid by fees, which were always the subject of contention, especially at Bilbao, where there were prior councils to defend the merchants. Then came the royal cedula of 1610, again abolishing fees, which received no more attention than the previous one. In February 1612, the Suprema wrote to Logrono that great complaints continued to come to the king, especially from Bilbao, and it suggested that an increase in the 50 ducats might be obtained in lieu of fees. Acting on this, a formal agreement was signed in July and confirmed by the Suprema, raising the annual payments to 2,000 reals, the 2 reals on book packages being retained. It is not likely that this was observed by the commissioner, for in 1616, at the request of the merchants and shipmasters, a return was made to the fee system and a definite scale was agreed upon. This scale, however, did not long content the commissioner, for in 1631 the complaints reaching the Suprema led to make an investigation, in which its fiscal admitted that the excessive fees and vexations were leading shipmasters to abandon those ports, especially Bilbao. The fees exacted were 50%, greater than the agreed scale. Vessels bringing fish were compelled in addition to give so many fish out of each barrel, and the delays were damaging. At the same time, the existing commissioner, Pedro de Villarreal, was highly commended. He had merely accepted conditions as he found them, established by his predecessors. His term of service extended from 1625 to 1662, and was subsequently looked back upon as a halcyon time of peace. This came to an end in 1663 with the appointment of a new commissioner, the licentiate Domingo de Leguina, whose excessive exactions and arbitrary methods excited the bitterest dissatisfaction. One thing which was the subject of special complaint was that, in place of examining merchandise in the warehouses of the consignees, he insisted on opening the packages on the quay, cutting the cords and scattering the contents, which were thus subjected to theft and to the vicissitudes of the weather. He even bored holes in casks of tar and explored the interior with a stick in the search for hidden books. Commerce on a large scale could scarce be conducted. Under such conditions, the prosperity of the port was seriously threatened. Passions on both sides were enkindled, and a controversy of the fierce kind raged for years. The Senorio of Biscay took sides with the merchants and represented forcibly to the Queen Regent the absurdity of ruining commerce and risking complications with foreign nations on the pretext of preventing the smuggling of prohibited books, considering the risks attendant on the attempt and the lack of purchasers for them if successful, in a community so ardent for the faith. Both sides resorted to extreme measures. The Contratacion in 1667 ordered the merchants not to pay fees. The tribunal, with the approval of the Suprema, ordered Leguina to collect them. He seized goods and sold them by auction. He prosecuted some of the merchants and compromised them for money. The English and the Dutch ambassadors intervened with protests against the disregard of treaty stipulations. The Queen Regent annulled the decree of the Contratacion forbidding the payment of fees, and against this the Senorio of Biscay, in a solemn assembly, November 7, 1668, protested as a violation of the fueros and adopted a decree prohibiting their payment. If attempts should be made to collect them, it would resist, and if other remedies failed, a junta general would be assembled to determine on further measures. Meanwhile, any secular official assisting Leguina was declared to be disabled for inoculation in the choice by lot by public office. This decree was published in Bilbao to sound of drum and fife with general popular rejoicing, and Leguina could find no official to resist him in his work, even his notary being disqualified for an office to which he aspired. Then the Council of Castile intervened May 15, 1669, with an order to Leguina to levy no fees for visiting ships, an action probably induced by a forcible protest from the Earl of Sandwich, the English ambassador, in which the exactions of the commissioner were represented in infractions of the treaties of 1665 and 1667. The serious character of the questions thus raised made an impression of the court and led to a royal decree of July 19, 1669, informing the Suprema that the vexations and excessive dues levied by Leguina on the commerce of Bilbao had aroused such hatred that means must be taken to avoid greater evils by removing the officials and replacing them with others who would perform their duties without arousing complaints. An immediate answer was required to this, but the Suprema waited until December 23rd and then reapplied in a long consulta, insisting that Leguina had been right from the beginning, that all laws or regulations infringing on the immunities of the Inquisition were invalid, and the mere attempt subjected its authors to punishment. As the Suprema was immovable, an attack was made directly on Leguina by royal letter and provision of the Royal Council, July 22, 1670. Ordering him to collect no fees for visiting ships and to make his visits as his predecessors had done. When this was served upon him, he made an unseemly reply and stopped the commerce of the ports until there were 18 ships waiting to discharge their cargoes. To overcome this, a solemn mandate in the name of the king and queen regent was addressed to him February 14th, reciting his misdeeds and ordering him to quit the kingdom or to present himself at court under penalty of 20,000 maravedis. When this was served upon him by a notary on February 23rd, he reverently placed it on his head and said he respected it as the act of his king. But the next day he served upon the notary his denegatoria, denial of jurisdiction, stating that he was simply the servant of the Suprema and of the Logroño tribunal, in which capacity he had complied with the obligations of his office, and the Suprema had never brought a charge against him, wherefore he supplicated the king to inform himself from the Suprema as to the matters contained in these royal provisions which had been obtained surreptitiously, and to recognize the justice of his reply and of his proceedings. The authority of the Suprema evidently was superior to that of the king. Thus baffled, the Queen Regent turned again to the Suprema with a decree of April 1, 1670, in which she rehearsed the agreements of 1561, 1567, and 1576, as providing that no fees were to be levied. The visits must be made in the former fashion so as to give no occasion of complaints of the violation of treaties, and Leguina must be removed. To this the Suprema replied, April 24th, insisting on the necessity of the visits. The resistance of Bilbao had proved contagious. The other ports were refusing to pay fees, and this would extend to the whole monarchy. The labor had to be paid for, and the Inquisition had no funds for salaries. It further explained that, in view of the hostility felt for Leguina, the Logroño tribunal had replaced him on January 3rd by Joan de Zabala, who had found himself unable to act, everybody being terrorized and refusing to assist him, so Leguina had resumed his duties. Then, on February 14th, the Council of State had intervened and allowed 18 waiting ships to discharge their cargoes without examination, which was an invasion of jurisdiction of the Inquisition and consequently null. At the end of February, Leguina had been replaced by Don Inigo Zebuar, who had been well received by the merchants, a fallacious welcome, for soon afterwards it was learned that Zebuar, though he reduced the fees, could get no assistance. His life was threatened and he asked to be relieved on June 20th. End of section 61. Section 62. A History of the Inquisition of Spain by Henry Charles Lay, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Breck. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lay, Book 8, Chapter 4, Part 6. Spheres of Action. Censorship. It would be a weariness to follow in full detail these obscure quarrels which were carried on with equal tenacity by both sides. A new commissioner, Pedro de Irazagarria Butron, was succeeded by Miguel de Jarabeytia, who were as little successful as their predecessors. At length, on May 26, 1680, the king sent to the Suprema a protest from the Dutch ambassadors as to the detention of vessels and damage to goods for the purpose of extorting illegal fees. This was followed June 26th by another from the ambassador of France, claiming that French vessels should be exempted and that only packages of books should be examined. Then, on September 4th, the king transmitted one from the English ambassador and accompanied it by a sharp message to the effect that at the moment it was especially desirable to avoid giving just cause of offence to England, and that a prompt remedy must be applied. It was not until October 22nd that the Suprema replied, insisting upon the enforcement of the visits. More books entered the port of Bilbao than all the other ports of the kingdom combined, and since these troubles began, the visits had been so impeded that immense numbers of books of evil doctrine were filling all the public and private libraries. The Suprema was willing to embroil Spain with half of Europe rather than to spend a few hundred ducats in salaries, and equally reckless was its assertion as to the commerce in books at Bilbao. When in 1648 it had called for the reports on the visitas de navios from all the northern ports, Commissioner Villarreal stated that no books had come to Bilbao for 8 years. At none of the other ports was there any allusion made to books, except at San Sebastian, where it was added that they rarely came. When we recall the 40 bales imported in one lot through Bilbao of Robles of Alcala in 1561, we can estimate the success of the Inquisition during the interval in securing the intellectual isolation of Spain and the flimsiness of the pretext on which was based this prolonged struggle. Still, the struggle went on, stimulated by fresh protests from the English and French ambassadors, and met by the Suprema with vociferous assertions of the masses of heretical literature introduced into Spain. At length, on June 12, 1681, the corregidor of Bilbao, Don Juan Gonzalez de Leon, a member of the Royal Council and judge in the Chancellery of Valladolid, in conjunction with the general deputies of the Senorio, issued a proclamation imposing a fine of 50 ducats on all shipmasters, merchants, and others who would pay the fees, thus uniting the royal and provincial authorities in resistance to the Inquisition. The Suprema met July 17th by ordering Jarabeytia to collect the fees, in which, if necessary, he was to employ excommunication and collect evidence to prosecute those who impeded the Inquisition. This was a declaration of war, but it was accompanied with secret instructions that he was not to seize goods but to keep a record for future use, and that he was to lose no opportunity for reaching a compromise with the Contratacion, which could take the shape, as formerly suggested, of a lump sum in payment on every ship according to its tonnage. Here the documents at my disposal come to an end. But there can be little doubt that on some such basis a compromise was reached, as the Contratacion had shown a willingness to pay a handsome sum in gross, in the confidence apparently that when the stimulus of fees for each package was removed, the examinations would be nominal, and the commissioners would render their office a sinecure. Barcelona was much more fortunate than Bilbao. The opposition of the viceroy and the intervention of the Banco Regio prevailed against the efforts of the tribunal. In 1819 it reported that there was no trace of commissioners ever having visited ships, except when there were Jews on board, and that a letter of 1677 showed that the visits were not made because shipmasters would not pay the fees. Elsewhere abuses were rife. At Cadiz, among seafaring men, the Santo Oficio was generally known as the Santo Ladronacio, although there are, and in Malaga, a judicious system of bribery was established, which removed most of the impediments of commerce, together with the obstacles of the importation of prohibited books. I have met with complaints about Valencia, Alicante, and other ports, and in view of the prevalence of official venality, it may be assumed that at least many commissioners use their virtually irresponsible power for profit, either by omitting supervision or rendering it unduly onerous. In 1705, an elaborate digest of all previous instructions was sent to the tribunals, with orders to impress upon their commissioners the necessity of constant vigilance to prevent the introduction of prohibited books. Not only were bales, hogsheads, casks, packages, and especially packs of playing cards, to be examined, but the chests and the beds of the sailors. Yet the utmost tact and dexterity were to be employed, so as to avoid exciting the repugnance felt by these visits. If any controversy arose, the commissioners were not to proceed judicially, but the matter was to be referred directly to the Suprema. In 1742 and 1764, there were royal orders issued prescribing rules and fees, which have interest only as showing the control acquired by the crown over the Inquisition. In 1801, the Suprema called upon the tribunals for information as to details and fees, the answer to which from Valencia indicates the purely financial view of the matter entertained by the officials. Since the royal orders of 1742 and 1764, it said, and for many years previous, no visits has been made, because the fee for large vessels was 8 reals and 4 for small ones, while it was necessary to hire a carriage from the city of Grau and a boat to the ship, so the cost was greater than the gain. In Denia, the visits had been performed anciently, but for many years they had been abandoned. In fact, it had for the most part become simply an impost levied for the benefit of the Inquisition on ships from foreign parts. The suppression of the Inquisition by the Cortes de Cádiz in 1813 was followed by a decree stating that at almost all the seaports of Spain there was collected for the Inquisition a fee known as Derecho de Inquisición on all foreign vessels on those from foreign ports, and that in some places there was further levied on all packages of books and merchandise another fee for registration, all of which the Cortes now suppressed. With the rival of the Inquisition under the Restoration, the visitas de navios were naturally resumed, whenever the opposition of shipmasters and foreign consuls permitted. Desiring to recognize the system, the Suprema, June 17, 1816, called for information, the response to which show that at the ports of the northern coasts, for the most part, it was maintained as far as practicable, while on the Mediterranean shore, except in Majorca and Valles Malaga, it was in a thoroughly demoralized condition. No visits were made to the ships. Where they could, commissioners collected fees from vessels arriving from foreign ports, but consuls raised objections, and when subsequently the Suprema ordered the commissioner of Cadiz to enforce payment, he could not persuade the consuls to assent, as they simply referred him to the ambassadors. The matter slumbered until in January 1819 the Minister of Marine addressed to the Inquisitor General a complaint from the Hydrographic Office that it had been obliged to pay to a commissioner 8 reals for examining 2 cases containing articles for it. This opened the way, and the Suprema laid before the king a long consulta, urging a reorganization of the system and presenting an elaborate series of regulations for his consideration. As the matter was of immense importance to religion and the state, the scheme resuscitated all the old details in the most rigorous form. Indeed, as regards books, it provided that the packages should be sealed with sealing wax, the duties were to be paid, and the packages forwarded to the Suprema by the confidential person. No more effective plan could have been devised for preserving Spain from the contagion of foreign ideas. And even without this, the other provisions gave the Inquisition the power of embarrassing largely the whole foreign commerce of the land. The scheme is of interest as revealing the aims of the Inquisition on the brink of its extinction. How it was regarded by the court we have no means of knowing, for before it could be acted upon, the Revolution of 1820 put an end to the active existence of the Holy Office. The restrictions which censorship imposed on learning and culture were slightly relieved by the licenses which were granted to possess or to read prohibited books. In the struggle with heresy, its confutation required that some persons be allowed to read the works in which it was taught, and it became customary to grant the privilege to those whose firmness in the faith could be trusted. The bull Insecina Domini of Paul III in 1536 excommunicates all who read Lutheran books without papal license, showing that already licenses were issued and that the power was reserved to the Pope. This power was valuable, and the officials of the Curia to whom it was confided were subject to temptations which, in that age of venality, were not likely to be resisted. Inquisitors, moreover, assumed that it was included in their delegated apostolical faculties and undertook to issue licenses, leading to a multiplication of privileged persons which nullified to some extent the prohibitory edicts. To remedy this, in 1547 the Suprema revoked all such licenses and forbade their future issues by the tribunals, a provision which had to be repeated in 1549 and 1551. This still left the papal licenses to the hands of those possessing them, but these were similarly annulled in 1550 by Julius III, in a brief from which we learn that papal legates also issued them. They speedily multiplied again, and the Suprema took advantage of the Lutheran excitement of 1558 to procure their withdrawal. In its report in September 9th of that year to Paul IV, it represented that many prelates and frailes kept prohibiting books in which of edicts and censures, refusing to surrender them on the plea that they held papal licenses. In view of the danger thence arising to the faith, the Pope was asked for a brief revoking of all such licenses, ordering their surrender under heavy penalties and authorizing rigorous prosecution of transgressors. Paul did more than merely respond to this petition. By a brief of December 21st he revoked all papal licenses, and then, by another of January 4th, 1559, he committed the execution of this Inquisitor General Valdez, who printed it in his Index of that year. These briefs granted to the Spanish Inquisition no power to issue licenses. So jealously was this reserved to the Holy See that in 1574 Gregory VIII gave a special license to the Inquisitor General Quiroga, with a faculty to extend it to members of the Suprema in order to enable them to decide cases of heresy. This caution contrasts largely with the favors shown to the Society of Jesus. Pius V, while yet Inquisitor General, granted to the Jesuit general faculty to issue licenses. This was confirmed vice vocis oraculo by Gregory VIII to establish it more firmly. He was asked to embody it in a brief, which he did, January 9th, 1575. Moreover, releasing them from any censures or other penalty by whomsoever inflicted, insofar as necessary to render the concession effective. Under this the Jesuits claimed to be independent of the edicts of the Spanish Inquisition. By it asserted its jurisdiction. In 1584 we find Padre Mariana applying for and obtaining a license through the Toledo tribunal to read certain specified books, a license which was withdrawn the same year. Still more aggressive was its action when, in 1587, it learned that some books had been received by the Jesuit Provincial, and the Suprema sent lists to them to the tribunals of Saragossa, Seville, Valladolid, with orders to examine them and detain such as they deemed proper. This assertion of control was repeated in 1602, when the Murcia tribunal was instructed to examine certain books belonging to the Jesuits and to return them if found unobjectionable. The earliest formal grant of power to the Spanish Inquisition to issue licenses would appear to have been made by Paul V, early in the 17th century, but it had been exercised long before. The Index of Quiroga, issued in 1583 in its preliminary rules 3, 4, 5, and 8, assumes that the inquisitors can grant written licenses, but this power was held subject to the Inquisitor General and Suprema, for in the orders accompanying the distribution of the Index, consultation with them was prescribed as a necessary preliminary. For some examples of the period it would seem that only special and not general licenses were granted, and that much circumspection was used with regard to them. Even Philip IV had no general license until about 1640 he wrote the Inquisitor General Sotomayor that he had been amusing his leisure with Guicciardini's history until he was told that it was prohibited. He therefore asked for a license to read it and other prohibited books not treating of matters of faith, for he would not accept a license to read them. A curious partial license was one granted in 1614 to Padre Guyo Sabil to read Catholic books in the English tongue. Apparently the language sufficed to render them prohibited. The tendency of the Spanish Inquisition to assert its independence of Rome in matters of censorship was especially manifested with regard to licenses. when in 1622 Gregory XV and in 1631 Urban VIII revoked all licenses, the Suprema declared that it was not the papal intention to interfere with the licenses granted by the Inquisitor General and that they remained in force. The next step was to invalidate all papal licenses, and accordingly, January 18, 1627, the Suprema presented a consulta to Philip IV, representing that many persons in Spain obtained them, and supplicating him to order his ambassador to urge the Pope not to grant them, adding that meanwhile it was deemed necessary to issue an edict annulling them. Philip was not prepared to sanction so flagrant an assault on papal authority, and replied that he would ask the Pope to transmit them through the Inquisitor General, but that, until the answer was received, no innovation must be attempted. Urban took advantage of the request to assert his supreme authority in a matter for which the Suprema had not bargained, for he annulled all licenses, both papal and those issued by the Inquisitor General, the only exception being the one held by the Inquisitor General himself. As all the bishops in Spain were ordered to publish this brief, the Inquisitor could not suppress it, however humiliating it was. Cardinal Zapata accordingly published it, February 21, 1628, requiring the surrender of all licenses within 20 days, under heavy penalties, and when he issued his Index of 1632, he included it in the brief and his edict. Urban pursued his victory by instructing Cardinal Maggini to write, December 6, 1628, to Zapata, defining his authority to be that of granting licenses to learned persons who furnish security that they wish to combat heresy. But the licenses were to be limited in time, and to require the recipients to show to the Inquisition what they wrote. This, however, was a failure, for no attention seems to have been paid to the prescribed limitations. The Inquisition continued its independent course, and finally carried its point to a certain degree by instructing the tribunals that, if papal licenses were presented to them, they were not to be admitted, but were to be forwarded to the Inquisitor General for his action. End of section 62. Section 63. A History of the Inquisition of Spain by Henry Charles Lay, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Breck. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lay, Book 8, Chapter 4, Part 7, Spheres of Action. Censorship. Towards the close of the 18th century, Llorente tells us that licenses were difficult to obtain. When an application was made, the Inquisitor General instituted secret inquiries as to the character of the applicant, and if the result was favorable, he was required to state his object and the nature of the works that he desired to consult. If the license was granted, it was limited to a specific number of books in a definite branch of literature. Permission to keep them was rarely granted, and all licenses accepted works directed against Catholicism, such as the writings of modern philosophers. Doubtless this strictness may be true of certain times, but the practice varied according to the temper of the Inquisitor General or Suprema. There sometimes was great laxity, if we may believe the reasons alleged in 1747 by Prado y Suesta, for revoking all licenses, for he says that on investigation he had found that they were not sought by men of learning, but by frivolous of both sexes to gratify idle curiosity. Many persons merely made a verbal request to read a single book, and extended the permission to cover all that they wanted, while others, seeing that ignorant people were licensed, thought that the privilege was general and availed themselves of it without asking. Licenses, moreover, were by no means so restricted in character as Llorente asserts. Some issued by Inquisitor General Bonifaz and Beltran cover all prohibited books, except Machiavelli, Sarpi, Council of Trent, works assailing the Catholic religion and obscenities. And we have seen that religious houses generally, and even occasionally, individuals held licenses enabling them to purchase from estates considering miscellaneous lots of prohibited books. the possession of which by deceased scholars show that they too must have enjoyed similar privileges. From the very numerous applications for licenses made about this time, it appears that they were customarily addressed to the Suprema, which referred them to the appropriate tribunal for report as to the age, the learning, and the judgment of the applicant. Under the Restoration, this inquiry was extended to his moral and political conduct, showing that discrimination was made in favor of those whose conservative tendencies were approved. We have seen the ferocious penalties of death and confiscation provided in the law of 1558 for unauthorized printing. With these the Inquisition had nothing to do, as its censorship was concerned only with books after publication, and its treatment of those who violated its rules was much more moderate. With its jurisdiction over them it allowed no interference even from Rome, for, about 1565, it suppressed a papal jubilee indulgence because it contained faculties of absolution for keeping prohibited books. In the Index of 1559, the penalties threatened for reading, possessing, buying, or selling prohibited books were excommunication, late sentencing, lache sententiae ipso facto, 200 ducats, and a menace of the prosecution for suspicion of heresy and disobedience. In the special edicts prohibiting individual books, there appears to be no established formula. Sometimes the penalty threatened is excommunication and 200 ducats, sometimes excommunication and punishment at discretion, sometimes excommunication, fine, and punishment at discretion. This discretion manifested itself in a great variety of penalties, moderate and severe, both as regards readers and booksellers, though the latter appear commonly to be more harshly visited. A rehabilitation granted, September 28, 1647, to Luis Sanaran, bookseller of Saragossa, infers that he had been reconciled and deprived of his civil rights. Miguel Rodriguez, a bookseller of Madrid, for importing and selling prohibited books, was sentenced, August 1, 1763, to reprimand, absolution ad cautelam, certain spiritual penances, all costs of the trial, and banishment from Madrid for 6 years, of which the first 3 were to be spent in an African presidio. This of course meant his utter ruin. At Lograno, in 1645, Fray Tomás de Nieva, for teaching in his professorial chair from a prohibited book, was condemned to grave reprimand before his colleagues, to retract certain propositions, to 4 years' reclusion, and to perpetual deprivation of teaching and of voting and being voted for. On the other hand, in 1803, Don Jacobo Maria de Parga y Puga, for the inveterate habit of reading prohibited books, knowing them to be prohibited, in contempt for many years of the authority of the Inquisition, was sentenced by the Madrid tribunal to 15 days' spiritual exercises and to private reprimand in the apartments of the inquisitor. So, in 1816, the Suprema, acting on a sumaria, and without subjecting the delinquents to a trial, sent to the Santiago tribunal a sentence on Juan Romero for reading prohibited books, and on Josef Manuel Garcia for selling and recommending them, for they were to present themselves before the nearest commissioner, who was to reprimand and warn them for a repetition of the offence they would not be treated with the same benignity. Cases of infraction until a comparative recent period are not frequent. After the excitement of the Reformation was suppressed, intellectual activity in Spain seems to have been reduced to such torpor that the forbidden fruit was little sought. In Toledo record from 1575 to 1610, there is not a single case, nor is there one in the same record from 1648 to 1794. In the disturbance of thought preceding and during the revolutionary epoch, prosecutions became more frequent, although still not as numerous as might be expected from the importance claimed by the Inquisition for its services. From 1780 until 1820, in the whole of Spain, the total aggregate amounts only to 305. During this period, from 1808 to 1815 inclusive, the Inquisition was virtually dormant, having only 5 cases in all, which would leave for the remaining years an average slightly under 9. The crowding of 101 cases in the 6 years, 1801 to 1806, reflect the urgency with which the government of Carlos IV was endeavoring to restrict the press, and there were 20 in 1819, insignificant of the agitation leading to the revolution of January 1820. The slenderness of the whole record is the measure of the success which attended the combined action of the State and of the Inquisition in benumbing for nearly 3 centuries the Spanish intellect. Although censorship was instituted for the suppression of heresy and for keeping heretical books and propositions from the people, it developed its utility in many directions, more or less connected with its primary object. It was inevitable that it should wage incessant warfare with the countless editions of the Bible with Protestant notes and commentaries, and we have seen how industriously Valdez prepared for his expurgatory index of the Scriptures in 1554. It was, however, the vernacular versions that caused the greatest anxiety. Prior to the Reformation, there was practically no restriction on the circulation of the Bible in the vulgar tongue. It is true that in the early 13th century the struggle with the Waldenses and the Cathari, who possessed versions of their own, led to prohibitions by Innocent III in 1199, and by Jaime I of Aragon in 1234, while the Council of Toulouse in 1229 prohibited the possession by laymen of any portion of the Bible, even in Latin, as well as the Breviary and the Hours of the Virgin in the vernacular, because they contained extracts. The decree of Pope Innocent became embodied in the Corpus Juris and thus remained familiar to canon lawyers. It was adduced in the Repertorium Inquisitorum of 1494, but only in a kind of obiter dictum, showing that at the time it was regarded as of no practical moment. Yet from the 13th to the 16th century there was no prescription of vernacular Bibles. The temporary causes which had led to the prohibition had passed away, and many translations were made, especially in Germany. One in Catalan by Bonifacio Ferrer, brother of San Vincent Ferrer, was printed in Valencia in 1478 under the editorship of the Inquisitor Jaime Burrell. It was natural that the use made of the Bible by the Reformers should cause the revival of these obsolete prohibitions. Even before the compilation of the indexes, we find Inquisitor General Tavera granting to the Duchess of Soma, wife of the Admiral of Naples, a license to keep and read a Bible in Italian. But the permission is limited to 1 year, showing how carefully it was guarded. It was therefore a matter of course that the Index of 1551 should contain a prohibition of the Bible in Spanish or any vulgar tongue. This zeal was intensified by the versions which the Spanish refugees Francisco de Enzinas, Juan Perez, Cipriano de Valera, and Casiodoro de Reina perfected and strove to introduce into Spain. But the prohibition was not confined to these. It extended to all fragments and extracts, however orthodox the rendering, as though to keep the unlearned ignorant of the existence of the Bible, or at least to make them understand that it was a wholly forbidden book. The Index of 1559 condemns 22 editions of the Hours of the Virgin in Romance, together with all others containing similar superstitions, but the real objection was the passage of Scripture contained in them, and in 1573 all hours in Romance were forbidden, as the Council of Toulouse had done in 1229. The extreme care with which the public was guarded from the Bible is seen in 1583 Index of Quiroga, which, in forbidding all portions of Scripture in Romance, only accepts the fragments embodied in the canon of Mass, and the texts which Catholic writers may cite and explain, provided they are not printed alone but are in sermons and other works of edification. So unreasoning was this jealousy that, according to Azpisueta, there were earnest men who desired to suppress vernacular versions of the Creed, the Pater Noster, the Ave Maria, and the Salve Regina, a zeal which found practical expression in 1674 when the Inquisition prohibited a work entitled Exercicios de Devotion because it contained translations of the Miserere, the Magnificat, the Te Deum, and the Athanasian symbol. The people were to be kept in such profound ignorance that the Sotomayor Index of 1640 prohibits not only the vernacular Bible and all its parts, but even summaries and compendiums of it, and as though to render it hateful in the Edicts of Faith, it was classed with the Koran and other Mahometan books, the possession of which was to be denounced to the Inquisition. It had to watch not only over its Spanish flock but over its converts in the Indies when it found that the English Society of Propagation of the Gospel had caused versions to be made in Indian tongues and was circulating them in America. The unexpected missionary work called for fresh exertion, and in 1710 we find Clement XI congratulating Inquisitor General Ibafiez on his efforts and urging him to persistent watchfulness. This treatment of the Bible seems to have piqued the curiosity of the intelligent, for in 1747 Inquisitor General Prado y Cuesta complains of the inordinate desire of many persons to have it in the vernacular, but among the mass of the people it produced the impression desired. In 1791 Villanueva tells us that they who once sought it now regard it with horror and detestation. Many care nothing for it and more are ignorant of its very existence. Yet within a decade of Prado's utterance the policy of the Church changed. Although in 1713 Clement XI, in the bull Unigentius, had condemned the use of the Bible by the laity as a Jansenist error, yet only 44 years later the Congregation of the Index in 1757 conceded the use of vernacular versions, if approved by the Holy See and accompanied with orthodox comments. This was followed in 1771 by a version of the Acts of the Apostles by Catenacci, dedicated to Clement XIV, and in 1778 by the brief In Tanta Liborum, in which Pius VI approved of a translation of the whole Bible by Archbishop Martini. The Spanish Inquisition promptly followed the papal example. In 1782 Inquisitor General Beltran issued a decree reciting that ample cause had existed for exceeding the Tridentine rule, but these causes had ceased, and in view of the usefulness of the sacred text, the Spanish rule was modified to conform to that of Trent, to the decree of the Congregation of 1757, and to the brief of 1778. In 1783 the Suprema ordered that the French version of the Le Maître de Saki would be freely allowed, and in 1790 there appeared in Valencia a complete Spanish translation by Cio de San Miguel, which was speedily and repeatedly reprinted. No such evils have followed as were dreaded for 2 centuries, showing how much wiser would have been the policy of meeting the heretic scriptures with an orthodox version, fortified with appropriate comments. The same jealousy of admitting the vulgar to too great a familiarity with spiritual things showed itself with regard to works of devotion and edification. In 1570 a consulta of the Suprema to the Inquisitor General recommended that the Catechism should not be printed in Romance. In the preface to the Index of 1583, the prohibition of works by men of the highest Christian repute, such as Fisher of Rochester, Thomas More, Geronimo Osorio, Francisco de Borja, Luis de Granada, Juan de Avila, and others, is explained, partly by books having been falsely attributed to them, partly by occasional incautious passages, and partly by their not being fitted for circulation in the vulgar tongue. The case of Obras de Cristiano of St. Francisco de Borja is illustrative. In the Index of 1559 it is simply prohibited. After his death in 1572 as General of the Society of Jesus, Quiroga in the Index of 1583 added, only in Romance or other vulgar tongue. He was beatified in 1624, but the canonization proceedings were delayed in consequence of his book being in the Spanish Index, and in 1662 the Jesuit Procurator General applied to the Inquisition to rubricate the leaves of a copy and send it to the Congregation of Rites, so as to remove the impediment, but it was not until 1671 that he was finally enrolled in the Catalogue of Saints. The effort to suppress mysticism manifested itself about 1620 in numerous edicts to suppress books of mystic devotion and lives of men and women who evidently were mystics. Books of ritual were scrutinized with the same captiousness. June 15, 1568, the pontificals printed in Duefias and Valladolid were ordered to be seized. In 1583, some pernicious errors were discovered in the breviary printed in Salamanca in 1575. Even books so elementary as cartillas or primers could not escape. A carta acordada of November 6, 1577, alludes to a previous one of June 14th, ordering the suppression of cartillas containing an article entitled Castigo y Doctrina de Caton. Since then, it goes on to say, there have been found in other cartillas various matters pernicious and contrary to the teachings of the Church, especially in those printed by Juan de la Plaza in Toledo. Wherefore all cartillas of every kind are to be seized in the shops and in the hands of children going to school, and orders are consequently given that no one, under pains and censures, shall hold, read, or sell them. There was little indeed to which the Inquisition could not extend the jurisdiction of its censorship. The Fifth Council of Lateran had alluded to the danger of the public peace arising from libelous attacks on individuals as one of the reasons for the examination and licensing of books before printing. But this was a purely secular matter, and the faculties conferred on the Inquisitor General looked solely to the suppression of heresy. Clement VIII, however, in his Index of 1596, included as subjects of condemnation defamatory memorials against religion or princes, and this opened the way to much else. It is true that an experienced writer assures us that although such writing can be suppressed by edict, it cannot be under pain of excommunication, but only as a command under pain of mortal sin, and that the Inquisition cannot proceed against the author unless the faith is involved. These limitations, however, were easily overpassed. We have seen how Inquisitor General Pacheco in 1623 condemned some legal documents in defense of the Chancellery of Granada, and commenced prosecutions of the council who had drawn them up. His successor, Zapata, in 1627, was a trifle more cautious in a conflict wherein the Inquisition was not concerned. The universities of Salamanca, Valladolid, and Alcala united in an attack on the Jesuits and their new college. When the Inquisition ordered the paper suppressed on the ground that it was anonymous and harsh in style, then Salamanca came forward and acknowledged the authorship. The Jesuit procurator still asked for its suppression, but the Inquisition decided that it was not the calidad de oficio and withdrew the prohibition, but still assumed authority to require the removal of asperities. Philip IV was dissatisfied, as he favored the Jesuits, and asked in what this case differed from others in which Pacheco had suppressed similar papers. End of section 63. Section 64. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, by Henry Charles Lay, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Breck. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lay, Book 8, Chapter 4, Part 8. Spheres of Action. Censorship. In 1687, the Tribunal of Toledo, in a quarrel with the Carthusian house of El Palur, suppressed 4 memorials of its adversaries to the king and punished the printer, Lucas Antonio Bedmar, with 4 years' exile from Toledo and Madrid. The grounds alleged were that they were scandalous, insulting, untrue, and defamatory of those mentioned in them. There was no assumption that the faith was in any way involved, and it was simply an expeditious way of putting an opponent out of court. Other similar cases will come before us presently, and meanwhile we may observe that there was even no scruple in prosecuting individuals in matters with which the Inquisition seemingly had no concern or jurisdiction, as in the case of Fray Bonifaz de San Pablo, tried in 1791 by the Barcelona tribunal for attempting to print a satirical paper on his own Carmelite order, and in that of Josef and Jacinta Lopez, prosecuted by Toledo in 1797, on suspicion of having posted some pasquinades characterized as infamatorios y hereticales. The power of the Inquisition were so elastic that they included the privilege of self-definition. none dared to call them in question, and it seems have been invoked to supply any deficiency in the ordinary machinery of justice or of injustice. Still less concerned with heresy was an important field in which the censorial functions of the Inquisition were employed by the crown. In its frequent struggles with the Holy See, in the Middle Ages papal domination encroached in many ways on the prerogatives of the temporal ruler, encroachments submitted to, with more or less resistance, by the loosely organized feudal monarchies. As these in the 16th century transferred themselves into absolutism, it was natural that they should grow restive, and the Reformation, which divided Europe into two hostile religious camps, gave to those sovereigns who remained faithful to Rome the opportunity of advancing their claims as the price of their support. The Spanish kings had always been distinguished by their resistance to papal pretensions, and though throughout the 16th century they sternly kept their people in the Roman obedience, they were none the less resolute in asserting the regalias or royal prerogatives, which in many ways conflicted with what Rome asserted as its rights. In the struggles thence arising, valuable assistance was derived from the works of legists, learned in the imperial jurisprudence and in the fueros, and those regalistas became especially obnoxious to the Holy See. Rome has never hesitated to use the powerful aid of the Index in supporting of ultramontanism, and it took special care to condemn and prohibit the books of the regalistas. It was important for a temporal sovereign to allow the suppression of works written in defense of his sovereignty, and the Inquisition, at least for a time, willingly supported the crown in this, not from loyalty, but because it afforded the opportunity of declaring and maintaining its independence of the hated congregations of the Inquisition and of the Index. When Melchor Cano, in 1555, at the request of Charles V, drew up a memoir in which he assailed with the bitterest invective the pretensions of the Curia, and Paul IV summoned him as a son of perdition to Rome for trial, the Spanish Inquisition sided with the sovereign and did not put the obnoxious paper in the Index. Melchor Cano was forgiven, but the causes of dissension remained. One of the chief of these was the jurisdiction exercised by the papal nuncio, bringing in its train a long series of abuses, relief from which was sought by the recuso de fuerza, like the French appel comme d'albus, admitting appeals to the Council of Castile from all ecclesiastical tribunals. The Curia claimed that to be an invasion of clerical liberty, and the struggle over it was long and envenomed. In 1591, Juan de Roa printed with dedication to the king and the approbation of the inquisitor a treatise entitled Apologia de Juribus Principalibus Defendis, arguing in favor of the royal jurisdiction in such cases, which excited no little indignation in Rome, where it was promptly condemned and burnt. Gregory XIV and the Roman Inquisition instructed the nuncio Millino to induce Philip II to follow this example, and the succeeding nuncio Caetano was ordered to labor with the utmost zeal to have the very memory of the book obliterated. So far was he from success that the Inquisition did not censor the work, and Philip rewarded the author with presentation to a priory worth 1,500 ducats per annum, of which he was promptly deprived by the nuncio on account of his unspeakable crimes. So bitter was the quarrel that Cardinal Baronius, in his Annals, so far forgot the impartiality of an historian as to introduce an indecent personal attack on Roa in his account of the Priscillianus of the 5th century. This led to a rumor that his volume would be condemned by the Spanish Inquisition, whereat he complained loudly in a letter to Padre Antonio Talpa, inveighing against the incredible audacity of the Spanish Inquisition, which placed on its index whatever it chose. It was probably this case that led Clement VIII, in his rules prefixed to his index, which have been retained in all succeeding indexes, to order the expurgation of whatever was contrary to the ecclesiastical immunity, liberty, and jurisdiction. This did not prevent Spanish legists and theologians from defending the regalias. About 1600, Enrique Enriquez, one of the most learned doctors of his day, produced his De Clavibus Romani Pontificis, in which, like Roa, he maintained the recurso de fuerza by order of the papal nuncio. This was suppressed and burnt so successfully that only 3 or 4 copies have survived, that an organized government should permit with its territory an antagonist foreign power to suppress books defending what it claimed to be its rights was an anomaly which could not be patiently endured. Rome was immovable, and a clash was inevitable. In 1613 appeared the Tractatus de Cognitione per viam violentis by Geronimo de Ceballos, and in 1617 Philip III, on learning that its condemnation was under consideration in Rome, wrote earnestly to his ambassador to prevent it, and declared that such condemnation would not be received or executed in Spain. This may have delayed, but did not prevent the adverse decision which came December 12, 1624, when Philip IV carried out his father's threat. The Spanish Inquisition did not condemn the work, but merely ordered some clauses altered, and its independence in the matter of censorship was tacitly asserted. Rome persisted, and independence was definitely asserted. In February 1627, the Count of Onate, ambassador to the Holy See, reported the issue of a decree condemning books, some of which were in defense of the regalias. In June, Philip sent this to the Suprema asking its advice. It replied that when the decree should come, it would be examined and reported to the king, without allowing its publication, for no ecclesiastic or layman in Spain could do so without orders from the Inquisitor General and Suprema. If such attempts were made, an appropriate remedy would be applied. The issue promptly came. The decree appeared April 12, 1628, and one of the books condemned was the Tractatus de Regia Protectione by Salgado de Somoza, president of the Royal Council and a vigorous upholder of the regalias. When the decree arrived, the king ordered the Inquisitor General to deliver it to him and wrote to all the bishops, forbidding them to publish it. Having thus established its independence, the Inquisition refused to recognize Roman condemnations of books of all kinds. When one was received, it caused the book to be examined by its own calificadores and voted on their report, either to approve or to condemn. Whatever was done was its own act, and not that of Rome. Another of the works condemned in the decree of April 1, 1628, was a book of extravagant Mariolatry entitled Elucidarium de Parce by the Jesuit Juan Bautista Poza, which had been tyrant in Spain for a couple of years. Poza wrote 2 abusive letters to Urban VIII asserting that the Roman congregations had no jurisdiction in Spain, where its own Inquisition was supreme, and in 1632 the congregation retorted by condemning all works. The Nuncio Monte made great efforts to have this published, but the Suprema had the books examined and only prohibited them until they should be expurgated. It was not all easy, however, to array the bishops in opposition to the Holy See, and in Valencia the self-willed Archbishop Acevedo claimed the right to publish the papal decree, and the tribunal there involved in some trouble with the episcopal officials. This was speedily followed by similar struggle over a vastly more important book of the Dialogo of Galileo on the Copernican system. In a consulta of December 13, 1633, the Suprema represented to Philip that under the papal delegations the Inquisition had exclusive control over censorship in Spain. In Rome, prohibitions were issued by the congregations of the Inquisition and Index, which were similar bodies to the Suprema, and it did not recognize them, but only the Pope and its superior. The nuncios were always endeavoring to extend their jurisdiction and required to be watched to avert greater evils. The inquisitors of Cuenca had just written that by nuncio's order the provisor had affixed to the church doors an edict regarding a book entitled Galileo Galilei Florentine, without having first given notice to the Inquisitor General. The results of allowing the nuncio to do this were foreseen when the Count of Onate reported from Rome the prohibition of certain books defending the regalias, and as the nuncios were continually endeavoring thus to invade the exclusive jurisdiction of the Inquisition in matters of censorship, the king was asked to sign the accompanying letter to the archbishops and bishops, similar to those dispatched in 1627. Of course, the king signed the letters. Whether the Suprema had Galileo's book examined or not, we have no means of knowing, but the Inquisition escaped the discredit of condemning him, and the name of the illustrious Florentine appears nowhere in the Spanish indexes. In the matter of regalistas, Philip, in a letter of April 10, 1634, to Cardinal Borgia, pointed out the unfairness of suppressing legal works defending his side of the controversy with the Holy See, in which the faith was not concerned, and he ordered urgent representations to be made to Urban VIII, with the intimation that, if Rome continued its course, he would suppress all books supporting the papal claims. Remonstrance was in vain. In 1640, Salgado de Somoza's Tractus de Supplicatione ad Sanctissimum was condemned. In 1642, Solorzano's Disputationes de Indiarum Jure, and in 1646, 6 or 8 similar works of which the nuncio was instructed to demand similar prohibition in Spain. Imperious as was this, the act was rendered doubly offensive by causing the condemnation to be published without transmitting it through the Inquisition, thus disregarding the independence claimed by the latter and the courtesy due to have a friendly government. Provocation so extreme could scarce have been ventured but for the desperate position of Spain, battling at once with France, with Portugal, and with Catalonia. Yet Spain was not sunk so low as to submit. After deliberation in the various councils, Philip, on October 16th, sent to the Suprema 3 consultas which they had presented, and ordered it to advise him. With unusual promptitude it replied, October 20th, expressing its unreserved adhesion to the regalias claimed by the crown, which were founded in rights inseparable from sovereignty, in papal bulls, and in immemorable prescription. The unlawful act of the nuncio was of the highest prejudice. The books condemned had in no way transcended proper limits. Their authors were pious Catholics, and the works had been circulated in sight of the Inquisition, whose duty it was to watch over such matters. The consulta ended with a promise to suppress the papal decree and to make the fact known everywhere so as to avert the injury which its publication might have caused. Thus, supported by the indignation of all its advisers, Philip issued a decree in November ordering the papal decree to be suppressed. The nuncio was rebuked and told that the royal indignation would seek other means of expression. The ambassador at Rome was instructed to represent the deep resentment which was felt, and to tell the Holy See that this was not a mere matter of opinions, in which it could interfere and dictate to Spain about rights coeval with the crown and always uninterruptedly enjoyed. Opportunity was also taken to reassert emphatically the independence of the Spanish Inquisition and the nullity, without its approval, of the acts of the Roman congregations. Notwithstanding this, the progressive decadence of Spain encouraged the Curia to make another attempt. In 1687, when the nuncio sent a decree of the Congregation of the Inquisition to the bishops, with orders to publish it, the Suprema lost no time in presenting 2 earnest consultas to the king, urging him to take prompt action in repelling this attempt to subject Spain to the Roman Inquisition. The persistence of the Curia was fruitless. The established custom resulted from these disputes, as described by an experienced inquisitor, was that when the nuncio received a brief from the congregations, he sent it to the Suprema, which ordered the book to be examined by its calificadores, and if they pronounced it objectionable, the Suprema issued a corresponding edict. Twice, he says, the nuncio, in order to evade these rules, caused edicts to be posted in the courtyard of his palace, but the Suprema abrogated them, punished those who did it, and reported to the king in order that he might warn the nuncio to observe the regulations. Sometimes, however, a brief came directly from the pope. Then the matter was in the hands of the king, who retained it and supplicated the pope that it should be published by the Inquisition. In Sicily, no brief was published without receiving the executor of the viceroy against the papal claims, achieved its independence of Rome, but it was fighting for its own hand, and when its object was attained, its allegiance to the church outweighed its allegiance to the sovereign. When the question was between its own jurisdiction and that of the crown, its attitude was most decisive. The condemnation by Pacio of the arguments of Don Luis de Guibio in the competencia of the Chancellery of Granada was not an isolated instance of this. In 1637 there was a bitter controversy between the Seville tribunal and the royal audiencia over the banishment of a familiar by the latter, in the course of which the Suprema ordered the suppression of various arguments prepared in support of the royal jurisdiction, and among them one by Juan Perez de Lara, the fiscal of the audiencia, written in the strict line of his duty. To this the Council of Castile took exception. In a consulta complaining that it was of great prejudice to the regalias, the paper contained nothing contrary to the faith, rendering it liable to censure of the Inquisition. Wherefore the council asked that all the documents suppressed should be examined by disinterested persons, and that of the Suprema be ordered in future not to suppress any paper in favor of the royal jurisdiction without preliminary notice to the king. To this temperate expostulation the Suprema replied with lofty disdain. The king was told that he should answer all remonstrances, as Charles V did, May 17, 1519, to the Diputados of Aragon. Quote, "As an affair of the Inquisition, it is not for us to interfere, nor can the fueros of the kingdom impede what the Inquisitor General does, as it is an ecclesiastical case." Unquote. It was astonished that there should be any question as to the power of the Inquisition established by papal bulls, decrees of councils, and inviolable custom, while the rule of the Index extends this power without limitation, at the discretion of the inquisitors. The regalias had been threatened was easy of disproof, for the peace and prosperity of the king's dominions were due to the unity of faith procured by the watchful care of the Inquisition. The object of the Council of Castile was to limit the jurisdiction of the Inquisition and to reduce its censorship to a matter of competencias, but the Inquisition alone could decide what belonged to it and what did not belong. Rome, it should no longer prove an ally of the crown in defense of the regalias. Llorente mentions two authors, Ramos de Manzano and Pedro Gonzalez de Salcido, whose works it condemned for defending the royal prerogative. It could not be depended on for suppressing those which impeached the regalias, and the state, in defending itself, was obliged to resort to its own censorship, as in case of the work entitled Casos Reservados a su Santidad, attributed to Dr. Francisco Barambio in 1694. It never appeared in the Index, but a royal auto condemned it as subversive of the regalias and prerogatives of the crown and ordered its suppression under pain of half confiscation and arbitrary penalties. End of section 64. Section 65. A History of the Inquisition of Spain by Henry Charles Lay, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Breck. History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3 by Henry Charles Lay, Book 8, Chapter 4, Part 8, Spheres of Action. Censorship. Rome, it should no longer prove an ally of the crown in defense of the regalias. Llorente mentions two authors, Ramos de Manzano and Pedro Gonzalez de Salcido, whose works it condemned for defending the royal prerogative. It could not be depended on for suppressing those who impeached the regalias, and the state, in defending itself, was obliged to resort to its own censorship, as in case of the work entitled Casos Reservados a su Santidad, attributed to Dr. Francisco Barambio in 1694. It never appeared in the Index, but a royal auto condemned it as subversive of the regalias and prerogatives of the crown, and ordered its suppression under pain of half confiscation and arbitrary penalties. We have already seen how in the 18th century the Inquisition, in the case of Macanas and the works of Barclay and Lavalle, and in that of the Catechism of Mesengui, took sides against the royal prerogative, although in the former Philip V weakly yielded, Carlos III in the latter not only temporarily suspended Inquisitor General Bonifaz, but took steps to protect more thoroughly the crown against papal encroachment, and to limit the censorship powers of the Inquisition. November 27, 1761, he laid down the basis of subsequent legislation in instructions of the Council of State to frame a new law adequate to the necessities of the case. In consequence, the Pragmatica del Executor of January 18, 1762, ordered that no bull, brief, or papal letter addressed to any tribunal, junta, judge, or prelate should be punished without having first been presented to the king for his approval by the nuncio, while those 4 individuals should be submitted to the royal council to see whether they affected the concordat, or prejudiced the regalias or the good customs and the usage of the kingdom. This was followed by a cedula of August 18th imposing restrictions on the inquisitor's censorship, but both of these were withdrawn by decree of July 15th, 1763, a decree obtained by the royal confessor, Padre Ileta, working on the king's superstition by representing the loss of Havana as the evidence of divine wrath. This respite, however, was not of long duration. At a junta called in 1768 to consider matters growing out of the expulsion of the Jesuits, the Counts of Floridablanca and Campomanes presented a memorial calling attention to the surreptitious introduction of several papal briefs and to the disastrous influence of the censorship in flooding the land with ignorance. The result of the discussion was the reenactment of the Pragmatica del Executor, with more enlarged provisions, and a cedula of June 6th, proving that the Inquisition should not prohibit any work by a Catholic of good repute without giving him a hearing, or, if he were a foreigner or dead, without appointing for him an advocate of competent character. The circulation of books was not to be suspended under pretext that they were undergoing examination, and those to be expurgated, the objectionable passages were to be speedily ficinated, so that the current reading of them should not be interrupted, and any special propositions condemned were to be clearly indicated so that they could be expurgated by the owners. Prohibition was to be confined to errors and superstitions and lax opinions, prejudicial to religion and morality, and no edict was to be published until it had been approved by the king. These reforms were in the spirit of those by which Benedict XIV, in the bull of Solicita ac Provida, had endeavored to soften the rigor of the Roman censorship, but they were largely impracticable. They excited lively opposition, especially the provision allowing the circulation of books during the process of examination, and Laurent tells us that, for the most part, the Inquisition eluded their restrictions. It was, of course, impossible for the king to pass judgment on all the condemnatory edicts which followed each other in rapid succession, and were submitted to him without explanation or record of the author having been heard in his defense. This latter provision, however, seems to have been observed. In 1775 we find the Suprema sending to Valencia certain conclusions commencing Systema Physicum de Hominis Generatium, together with the papers concerning their condemnation and the cedula of June 16, 1768, so that the party could be heard in defense. The author, however, was not allowed to print and circulate his defense, though he might have license for enough copies to supply the members of the Suprema. In a case in which he distributed them through the universities, they were called in and suppressed, and if he attacked the witnesses and calificadores, he was liable to savage penalties of the bull Si de Prodigendis. Yet, in the end, the author was entitled to a hearing. In a case occurring at Laurent in 1816, the Suprema instructs the tribunal to suppress a certain pamphlet in the next edict, but it is to ask the author, Dr. Martin Batincas, whether he desires to defend it, if so, to furnish him with the censures, but not the names of the calificadores, when the matter will take its regular course. The provision for a defender in the case of deceased and foreign authors was similarly maintained. In 1816, the Suprema instructed the Madrid tribunal to take up the case of a book entitled El Niño Instruido, which had been suspended on account of the troubles. Now a new edition had appeared, which must be seized, and a copy of the censures be furnished to the general of the Barefoot Carmelites. If he should not desire to put forward a defender, the tribunal was to appoint a defensor de oficio. So scrupulously was this observed that in 1817 a single copy of a French book printed in 1801 entitled Du mariage dans ses rapports avec la religion et avec les lois nouvelles, found in possession of Canon Miguel Cortes, was duly condemned by calificadores when Pedro Cento was appointed to defend it. On his refusal, proceedings appear to have been dropped. During this later period, the Inquisition and the state were in firm alliance against their common enemy, the Revolution, and the state made full use of the Inquisition as a political instrument, although it had its own elaborate and effective censorship. This employment of the Inquisition was a new development, for in the earlier time the instances in which inquisitorial censorship was called upon for political service are surprisingly few. In the case of Antonio Perez, it was inevitable that the Inquisition should prohibit his writings and unauthorized accounts of his persecutions. There was less excuse for suppressing, in 1609, Padre Mariana's volume of essays on account of his criticism of the ruinous debasement of the coinage. There was unworthy compliance to the Holy See when, in 1606, the Suprema forbade the possession of any one of the papers and memorials issued by Venice. In its quarrel with Paul V, on the pretext of their being scandalous to Christendom and an event greater misuses of its power, when it arrested and prosecuted Francisco de la Cueva, a lawyer whom the Venetian ambassador had employed to write in defense of the Republic. On the eve of the Catalan revolt, in 1640, the protest of Barcelona to the king was suppressed as coming under the rules of the expurgatorio, being seditious, insulting, and scandalous, and this precedent was followed with all the writings on the subject during the revolt. On the whole, however, throughout the first 3 centuries of its existence, the political use made of the Inquisition, in this and other ways, was wonderfully small. It was otherwise when the upheaval came which threatened the stability of all monarchical institutions, and nothing was more dreaded than the public opinion, which might develop into action. All the agencies at command of the state were felt to be needed, and Carlos IV hastened to open the way for the Inquisition by declaring, in an edict of 1789, that all which contributed to spread revolutionary principles was heresy, being a doctrinal error, contrary to the teachings of the apostles Peter and Paul, and this was speedily reduced to practice by an edict of the Inquisition ordering the surrender of all papers coming from France and conveying revolutionary ideas. Watchfulness on importations, especially from France, by both royal and inquisitorial officials was redoubled, and for years new methods were constantly devised to keep the population in ignorance of events beyond the Pyrenees. It was in vain. French newspapers and books were smuggled across the frontier, and forbidden speculations on the laws of nature and the rights of man were widely disseminated. When the crisis came with the deportation of the royal family and the Napoleonic invasion, there was a leaven of liberalism sufficient to find expression in the demand for a new order of things. The extraordinary Cortes, elected by universal suffrage and assembled at Cadiz in 1810, lost no time in framing a law for the freedom of the press. Yet the tradition of the necessity of censorship was so strong that the decree of February 22, 1813, suppressing the Inquisition, transferred to the bishops the jurisdiction over censorship as well as over heresy. The law on the press had provided a control by the state over all printing, and books on religion were subject to a second episcopal examination, with full power of condemnation and suppression, which elaborate provisions were made for an authoritative index. This cumbrous scheme never had vitality, and the Restoration of 1814 restored to the Inquisition its jurisdiction over the press. As soon as it could spare time during the labor of reconstruction, it addressed itself to the suppression of the revolutionary literature of the previous 6 years. A Carta Acordada of October 25, 1814, ordered the tribunals as speedily as possible to notify the Suprema of all objectionable books, pamphlets, and papers that had been written or printed in their districts, with all details as to the authorship and place of publication. From this was compiled a list of 183 prohibited publications, including 35 journals, but an edict of July 22, 1815, described this as an incomplete. The faithful were referred to the rules of the index as defining whatever had been omitted, and all such were to be surrendered within 6 days under the traditional penalty of excommunication and 200 ducats. All the old regulations and indexes were declared to be in force, and on August 3rd, each tribunal was ordered to suppress all objectionable matter printed within its district. The correspondence of the Suprema at this period shows minute and constant watchfulness over the press, and a large part of the labors of the Inquisition during its brief resuscitation was devoted to censorship, mostly of a political character. The constitutional refugees who had fled from the vengeance of the reaction were busy with such slender means as they could command in propagating their ideas, as the Protestant refugees had been in the 16th century, and there was the same anxious vigilance to counteract their efforts, while the danger was greater, for a large part of the population was known to secretly share their views. Thus, in 1818, circulars were received in Madrid announcing the appearance in London of a weekly entitled El Español Constitucional. Immediately, the Royal Council sent out orders to the judicial and military authorities to seize all copies, and the Juez de Imprentas did the same to its subordinates, all of which resulted in finding enough of the circulars to show that they had been widely distributed. Then the aid of the Inquisition was invoked, and on August 3rd, the Suprema ordered the tribunals not only to seize all copies, but to arrest anybody concerned. Then, on September 13th, the king reported that the wicked refugees in London, who had been, through lack of funds, obliged to abandon the project, had recently obtained contributions and had resumed it, wherefore fresh diligence was enjoined. 2 days later, the Suprema forwarded this to the tribunals with orders to exert themselves in seizing the circulars and periodical and also the accomplices in the so-called conspiracy. Again, on November 4th, the Suprema called renewed attention to its former letters and enclosed a royal order stating that the London ambassador reported the appearance of the second number of the journal, and insisting on every precaution to prevent its circulation in Spain. There is no trace, however, of any copy of the mysterious periodical being captured by the Inquisition or of the arrest of anyone concerned. Simultaneously with this, on November 5th, the Suprema transmitted another royal order stating that letters intercepted in the mails containing prospectus of a periodical entitled Gabinete de Curiosidades Políticas y Literarias de España y Indias, to be issued in London by Gallardo, former librarian of the Cortes. The Suprema consequently issued instructions enjoining the utmost vigilance in seizing the prospectus and copies of the periodical. The happy faculty of confusing the spiritual and temporal, so valuable to the medieval church, had evidently not been lost to the Spanish monarchy. Although in general the Inquisition carefully abstained from intrusion in the field of morals, yet in censorship it undertook to guard the public from which might contaminate virtue as well as from what affected faith. This was justified by the rules of the Tridentine Index as well as that of Clement VIII in 1596, where lascivious books and illustrations were to be prohibited or expurgated. Literature, however, largely escaped, at least until the later period. The Celestina of Francisco de Rojas, of which more than 30 editions were printed in the 16th century, its popularity leading to its use as a school book, notwithstanding its somewhat crude indecency, escaped attention, until the Index of 1640 ordered the expurgation of about 50 lines, and it was not prohibited until that of 1790. Art attracted earlier attention, especially when its employment in sacred subjects lacked dignity. However stimulating it might be to the piety of the unlettered public, the first allusion I have met in this function of the Inquisition occurs in 1568, when Inquisitor Moral, in reporting his visitation to San Sebastian, mentions Penance and Gracia de Caldir for possessing a pintura deshonesta, whereupon the Suprema told him that he should have sent the picture to it apparently as a matter of censorship. It reserved the decision to itself. The next is a Carta Acordada of 1571 ordering the suppression of some figures on linen of the Crucifixion and the Trinity, in which the calificadores had discovered symbols of Lutheran doctrines, and a series of 12 woodcuts of the Passion, with an epitome on the backs in Latin and French. This is emphasized in the expurgatory Index of Quiroga in 1583, of which the 12th rule is directed against all representations of sacred persons or objects which savor of derision and irreverence. Spanish piety, in fact, occasionally manifested itself in somewhat grotesque form, as in certain images of linen of the Christ child in military uniforms, the suppression of which was ordered in 1619. In 1649 the Suprema was scandalized by the great irreverence and diabolical indecency, with a savor of sacrilege, of ribbons which were called bowels of angels, or hearts or entrails of apostles, and under the customary penalties it forbade asking for, buying, or selling ribbons with such names. A few weeks later it prohibited all razors or knives on the handles of which were engraved images of Christ, the Virgin, the saints, or the instruments of the Passion. All found in the shops were to be seized, and the commissioners at the ports were to see that none were imported. After the more serious work of the Inquisition was accomplished in the elimination of Judaism, Protestantism, and Islam, its energies were more actively employed in this direction. In 1787 we find that the Valencia tribunal prosecuting Francisca Lazaro for indecent songs. In 1803 the caprichos of Goya, the leading artist of the period, wounded inquisitorial sensibilities. He was summoned and his prosecution was commenced, but he was saved by the intervention of Carlos IV. Two of the last acts of the Valencia tribunal in 1820 were proceedings against the rime y prose del Dr. Tommaso Crudeli, which it pronounced to be obscene and impious, and the condemnation of a book called Zibaldone for lascivious propositions. The theatre also became subject to inquisitorial censorship. In 1817 a tragedy entitled La Obstinación de un Padre was presented on the Valencian stage October 9th and the 10th. It seems to have excited disapproval, and on the 13th the manuscript was presented to the tribunal for its censure. In Madrid the Suprema acted as a preliminary censor, and in 1815 we find it ordering the local tribunal to examine the opera El Hombre de Mal Genio y Buen Corazón and the comedy El No de los Niñas, and on the report that the fiscal had no objection to the representation, it gave its assent. So, in 1819 the Suprema returns to the Seville tribunal its calificación of 4 sainetes, or farces, with orders to put it into more intelligible shape, to vote on it, and to return its final decision. Works of art, however, were the principal objects of inquisitorial puritanism. In 1793 the Valencia tribunal formed a process concerning a certain snuff-box with a scandalous picture, supposed to be in possession of Don Jacinto de Castro, governor of the Sola del Crimen. Solicitude of the public morals was so acute that, October 2nd, 1815, the Suprema approved a decree of the Madrid tribunal ordering all the hairdressers of the city to remove from their windows or alter to decency the wax busts which they exhibited as specimens of their art, apparently because they made too exuberant a display of their charms. Artists and dealers in pictures were held to a strict accountability. But a week before the last case the Suprema had considered a prosecution of the Seville tribunal of Juan Rodriguez and Domingo Alvarez de Cadiz, the former for painting and the latter for exhibiting in his shop a picture called Diana, provocative by its posture and nudity. They were ordered to appear before the commissioner of Cadiz, who should reprimand and absolve them from the excommunication incurred, and warned them that a repetition of the offense would be visited with the penalties provided by Regla 11 of the expurgatorial banishment and 500 ducats fine. 6 months later Pascual Francini of 2 Pinturas Obscenas was fined 100 ducats, and as he was ordered to be set at liberty, it is evident that he had been imprisoned. He pleaded poverty and his fine was kindly reduced. 3 months later, Santiago Schmidt and his son Joseph were sentenced by the Madrid tribunal for selling to the Prussian ambassador an indecent picture for 8,000 reals. For this they were fined 2,000 reals, which the Suprema benignantly reduced to 50 ducats. Doubtless in this case ambassadorial privilege saved the purchaser from prosecution, for the possession of objects regarded as immoral was calidad de oficio, and the records are full of cases against those who owned snuff-boxes, watches, packs of cards, etc., with indecent figures or inscriptions, as well as pictures, engravings, and books with plates that offended the modesty of the censors. No doubt much of what was condemned was thoroughly vicious and disreputable, but the resultant purification scarce compensated for the invasion of private life, and the stimulus to the detestable habit of espionage and denunciation, through which alone such matters could come to the knowledge of the tribunals. Much good art, moreover, was undoubtedly sacrificed by ignorant censors, for the objects thus condemned were destroyed. In 1805, at Valencia, a painting on copper of the adultery of Venus was thus ordered to be effaced, and when this was done, the sheet of copper was delivered to the alcalde del crimen to be restored to the owner. Akin to this was the tearing out of objectionable plates from books, which happens to be mentioned in 1819 in the case of Don Luis Montfort, a captain of artillery. Thus the censorship of the Inquisition was well embracing, from the most dangerous heresies of Luther and Calvin, the popularization of Scripture, the relations between the Church and State, the liberalism of modern era, down to the veriest trifles. It was an engine of immense power, constantly applied for the furtherance of obscurantism, the repression of thought, the exclusion of foreign ideas, and the obstruction of progress. It was accompanied by a state censorship based upon the law of 1558, perfected in the innumerable successive regulations, of a character most vexatious and embarrassing to authorship, and this duplication of censors exercised a most deplorable depressing influence on literature and culture. Authorship was discouraged by the uncertainty whether works on which perhaps years of labor had been spent would secure a license to print. The business of publication was rendered extra hazardous by the fact that a book printed with due license from the state might at any moment be prohibited by the Inquisition, and the whole edition to be seized and destroyed, while purchasers who had bought such a licensed book were liable to be deprived of it without compensation. Thus, between the state and the Inquisition, whether working in unison or at cross purposes, the intellectual development which in the 16th century promised to render Spanish literature and learning the most illustrious in Europe was stunted and starved into atrophy. The arts and sciences were neglected, commercial and industrial progress was rendered impossible, and the character which Spain acquired among the nations was tersely expressed in the current sayings that Africa began at the Pyrenees. End of section 65.
Section 66 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lee. Statistics of Offenses and Penalties. See page 93. It is manifestly impossible to compile the statistics of inquisitorial activity during the centuries of its existence and amid its numerous tribunals, but some fragmentary figures may serve to illustrate the comparative frequency of the offenses with which it had to deal and the character of the punishments which it inflicted. As regards the latter, it will be remembered that the sentences usually comprised several penalties. Offenses. The following summary of cases acted upon by the Tribunal of Toledo is condensed from the Catálogo de las causas contra la fe seguidas ante el Tribunal del Santo Oficio de Toledo, Madrid, 1903, prepared by Padre Fresca S.J. and Don Miguel Gómez del Campillo, from the original records. As the earliest case is of 1483, page 192, and the latest of 1819, page 81, it would appear to cover the whole activity of the tribunal, but it is manifestly imperfect, in view of the masses of Judaizers reconciled and the effigies burnt of the dead and fugitives in the early years of the organization. Volume 1, pages 165 to 72, and page 183. In a minor degree, this is also shown by comparison with tables below of portions of the period from other sources. These latter also have interest as indicating changes in the character of offenses at successive periods. The classification of Señor Gómez del Campillo is as follows: bigamy, 188; blasphemy, 755; fornication not a sin, 259; personating officials and forged licenses, 48; fautorship of heretics, 60; sorcery, 296; heresy, Illuminism, 39; Anglicanism, 14; Calvinism, 18; Freemasonry, 3; Lutheranism, 79; general, 72; deluded and deluders, 25; impeding the Inquisition, 62; violation of disabilities, 91; insults to officials, 186; personating priesthood, 33; Judaizers, 977; prohibited books, 34; Moriscos, 219; irreverence and scandalous speeches, 551; false witness, 34; propositions, erroneous, 60; scandalous, 63; heretical, 46; marriage in orders, 16; sacrilege, 74; solicitation in confession, 105; various, 43. A manuscript volume in the library of the University of Aye contains the reports to the Suprema by the Tribunal of Toledo of its operations from the auto de fe of September 4, 1575, to that of February 7, 1610. The auto of 1595 is, however, missing, and the report of the last one is incomplete, breaking off at the 10th case. So far as it goes, the record for these 35 years embraces 1,172 cases, an analysis of which yields the following results: bigamy, 53; blasphemy, 46; fornication not a sin, 264; personating officials, 13; sorcery, 18; heresy, Illuminism, 12; Protestant sects, 47; Greek Christians, 3; offenses against the Inquisition, 22; personating priesthood, 25; Judaizers, 174; Moriscos, 190; irreverence, 5; false witness, 8; false witness in cases of limpieza, 57; solicitation in confession, 52; propositions, marriage better than priesthood, 30; scholastic discussion at Alcalá, 7; ridicule of pious observances, 3; story about St. Peter, 4; excuse for blasphemy, 1; on God, 9; on Christ, 5; on the Virgin, 4; on Magdalene, 4; on belief in Virgin and Saints, 1; on the grace of God, 1; on salvation, 12; on the resurrection, 6; on the future life, 4; on indulgences, 9; on images, 6; on the necessity of Mass, 6; on confession, 5; on intercessory prayer, 1; on offerings for the dead, 3; on the Eucharist, 3; on the sacraments, 1; on canonization and saints, 3; on the authority of Scripture, 1; on the miracle of the loaves and fishes, 1; on the stigmata of St. Francis, 1; on excommunication, 1; on marriage and adultery, 9; on oaths, 1; on holy orders, 1; on Moors, 1; on self-damnation, 1; on infidelity, 1; on impeccability, 1; on sin inevitable, 1; on the papal power, 2; on women, 1; on homicide, 1; on the Inquisition, 3; on the royal power, 3; on incest, 1; on the defeat of the Armada, 1; various, 8. Offenses of officials, 22; slander, 1; hermaphrodite, 1; quarrel over an Irish benefice, 1; Imposture, 1. Smuggling of horses, 1. Apostate frailes, 2. Favoring Vendoma, Henry IV, 1. Irregularities, 1. In Legajo 1 of the Archivo Histórico Nacional, Inquisición de Toledo, there is a volume of which the introductory lines state that on February 8, 1648, Gonzalo Bravo Grajera, then inspecting the tribunal, reminded the inquisitors that a Carta Acordada of May 22, 1570, required a register to be kept of all penitents appearing in the autos, with their punishments. Thereupon a book was procured for the purpose, and the record commenced. It extends from 1648 to 1794, and is doubtless complete. An analysis of this yields the following results. Bigamy, 62. Blasphemy, 37. Fornication not a sin, 3. Personating officials, 4. Fautorship, 16. Sorcery, 100. Illuminism, Molinism, etc., 17. Protestantism, 11. Heresy, 3. Suspicion of heresy, 2. Deluded and deluders, 16. Impeding the Inquisition, 13. Insulting officials, 3. Disrespect to Inquisition, 5. Speaking ill of Inquisition, 1. Personating priesthood, 12. Judaism, 659. Mahometanism, 5. Apostasy, 2. Irreverence and sacrilege, 3. Propositions, 74. Marriage in orders, 10. Solicitation in confessional, 68. Mala doctrina in confessional, 9. Rebaptism Greek, 1. Errors, 1. Hypocrita, 1. Fray Barrocosa, 2. Gypsy, 1. Greek, 1. Atheism, 1. Burlesque sermon, 1. Threatening a witness, 1. Hiding confiscated property, 1. Offense of a notary, 1. Blackmailing, 1. Breaking prison, 2. Breaking exile and presidio, 4. Non-performance of sentence, 1. Cofradia execrable, 1. Improper rules for a congregation, 1. Printing without a license, 1. In the Royal Library of Berlin, Quarto 9548, is a volume containing relations of 64 autos held in various tribunals between 1721 and 1727. During this period, inquisitorial energy was mainly directed against Judaism, as will be seen from the following summary of the cases. Bigamy, 35. Blasphemy, 4. Fautorship, 2. Sorcery, etc., 57. Protestantism, 3. Heresy, 4. Deluders, 2. Personating priesthood, 1. Personating officials, 1. Judaism, 824. Apostasy, 6. Mahometanism, 1. Marriage in orders, 1. False witness, 17. Rebaptism, 2. Breaking prison, 3. Punishments. In the Toledo record of 1575 to 1610, the sentences include relaxation in person, 15. In effigy, 18. Confiscation, 185. Fines, aggregating 2,586,625 maravedis, 141. Reconciliation, 207. In effigy, 1. San Benito, 186. Imprisonment, 175. Reclusion in convent or hospital, 87. Galleys, 91. Scourging, 133. Vergüenza, 26. Exile, 167. Prohibition to leave Spain, 6. Gagging, 20. Deprivation of confessing, 42. Disability for orders, 10. To be last in choir and refectory, 26. The discipline, 11. Spiritual penances, 17. Hearing Mass as penitent in church, 66. Hearing Mass in Audience Chamber, 150. Abjuration de vehementi, 21. De levi, 49. Reprimand or warning, 56. To write no more books, 1. Temporary suspension from priestly functions, 1. Public recantation, 1. Cases dismissed, 30. Cases suspended, 98. Acquittals, 51. The Toledo record from 1648 to 1794 yields the following summary. Relaxation in person, 8. In effigy, 63. Confiscation, 417. Fines, aggregating 30,600 ducats, 50. Fines of half property of culprits, 14. Reconciliation, 445. Prison and San Benito, short terms, 183. Prison and San Benito, perpetual, 161. Prison and San Benito, irremissible, 82. Reclusion in convents, etc., 91. Galleys, presidios, and arsenals, 98. Scourging, 92. Vergüenza, 10. Exile, 566. Deprivation of confessing, 68. Disability for orders, 3. Suspension from orders, 4. Suspension from confessing, 1. Suspension from preaching, 11. Deprivation of priestly functions, 5. Degradation from priesthood, 1. Abjuration de vehementi, 51. De levi, 314. Reprimand, 467. Cases suspended, 104. Acquittals, 6. The sentences in the 64 autos de fe between 1721 and 1727 include relaxation in person, 77. Relaxation in effigy, 74. Confiscation, 776. Fine of 1/2 of property, 12. Reconciliation, 630. Prison and San Benito short terms, 252. Prison and San Benito perpetual, 113. Prison, etc., irremissible, 275. Galleys and presidio, 99. Scourging, 297. Vergüenza, 13. Exile, 189. Abjuration de vehementi, 31. Abjuration de levi, 125. End of section 66.
Section 67 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ronaldo. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lee. Documents 1 to 4. Document 1. Conclusion of sentence of relaxation of Don Gaspar de Centellas for Protestantism. Valencia, September 17, 1564. Christi nomine invocato. Fallamos, atento los autos y méritos del dicho proceso que el dicho promotor fiscal probó bien y cumplidamente su acusación y querella, damos y pronunciamos su intención por bien probada, en consecuencia de lo cual que debemos declarar y declaramos el susodicho don Gaspar Centellas ser hereje, y estar suficientemente convencido por suficiente número de testigos, y demás desto haber confesado, afirmado y defendido pertinazmente ante nos las dichas proposiciones heréticas, y por tales condenadas y declaradas, y que le debemos condenar y condenamos que el día del auto de la fe salga al caudalso con insignias de relajado, y que allí le sea leída públicamente esta nuestra sentencia, por la cual le declaramos por hereje abominable, pertinaz, obstinado y endurecido, y por ello haber caído e incurrido en todas las penas en que caen e incurren los semejantes herejes impenitentes y pertinaces, y porque por todas vías se ha procurado con el susodicho con toda solicitud y cuidado de atraerlo y reducirlo a nuestra santa fe católica, ofreciéndole toda benignidad y misericordia, de que él no se ha querido ni quiere aprovechar. Y pues la Santa Madre Iglesia no tiene otra cosa ni remedio de que usar con el susodicho, pues él la menosprecia, sino relajarlo a la justicia y brazo seglar, como a miembro podrido, infecto, pestífero y nocivo, porque otras no se dañen ni padezcan con él. Por esta nuestra sentencia, como a hereje pertinaz y obstinado, lo relajamos al muy ilustre señor don Juan Lorenzo de Villamasa, vicerrey y capitán general por su majestad en esta ciudad y reino, o al muy magnífico mosén Quille Ramón Catalán, justicia criminal en esta dicha ciudad, o a quien la punición y castigo del dicho crimen pueda pertenecer y pertenezca, y a su señoría pedimos por merced, y a dicho justicia muy afectadamente rogamos y encargamos que con el susodicho se manden hacer y hagan misericordiamente. Otro sí, por cuanto el dicho delicto y crimen de la herejía excede y es muy mayor sin comparación que otro alguno, por ser cometido contra la divina majestad, y por su graveza, porque en las personas de los perpetradores de él no puede ser suficientemente punido ni castigado, y la pena de él se extiende a los bienes, progenie y posteridad de los que lo cometen. Por esta nuestra sentencia declaramos sus bienes ser confiscados a la Cámara y Fisco Real de su Majestad, desde el tiempo que cometió los dichos delictos, con los cuales mandamos acudir al magnífico mosén Bernardino Gutiérrez, receptor de este santo oficio en su nombre, y los hijos, hijas, nietos y nietas del dicho don Gaspar Centellas, hereje impenitente, pertinaz y obstinado, descendientes por línea masculina en segundo grado y por femenina en primero, ser privados de todas y cualesquier dignidades, beneficios y oficios eclesiásticos y seglares que sean públicos y de honra, que los susodichos tienen y poseen, y ser inhables y incapaces para impetrar, tener y poseer otros de nuevo, ni poder ser justicias, jurados, clérigos, ni notarios, ni otro ninguno oficio público de honra, y no poder traer sobre sí ni en su persona oro, plata, perlas, piedras preciosas, seda, grana, camelote ni paño fino, armas, ni cabalgar en caballo, hacer ni traer otra cosa alguna de las que por derecho e instrucciones de este santo oficio le son prohibidas, y por esta nuestra sentencia definitiva, juzgando ansí, lo pronunciamos, sentenciamos y mandamos en estos escritos y proceso pro tribunali sedendo. El licenciado Aguilera. Don Miguel Vicky. Sentencia dada y promulgada por el señor inquisidor, el licenciado Bernardino de Aguilera, los días, mes y años susodichos, en presencia de las partes susodichas, las cuales pasaron por ella. Presentes fueron por testigos a la publicación de la dicha sentencia los discretos Miguel Pérez de Huérmeda, Pérez López y Francisco Pastor notarios, y muchos otros vecinos de Valencia. Pasó ante mí Miguel Beló, notario. Document 2. Release from Perpetual Prison and San Benito. Nos, los del Consejo de sus Majestades, que entendemos de las cosas tocantes al oficio de la Santa Inquisición, hacemos saber a vos, los reverendos inquisidores contra la herética pravedad y apostasía en la ciudad y arzobispado de Toledo y su partido, que vimos la relación que por nuestro mandado enviastes de los méritos del proceso de María Gómez, mujer de Diego Carillo Herrero, vecino de Daimiel, por la cual parece que fue recibida a reconciliación y condenada a cárcel perpetua y hábito en 16 días del mes de julio del año pasado de 541 años, y que después acá cumple bien su penitencia, por lo cual y por otras causas que nos mueven, queriendo usar de piedad y clemencia con la dicha María Gómez, nuestra voluntad es de le mandar conmutar la penitencia de la dicha cárcel perpetua y hábito en otras penitencias espirituales. Por ende, nos vos encargamos y mandamos que luego que esta nuestra provisión vos fuere presentada, conmutéis a la dicha María Gómez la penitencia de la dicha cárcel perpetua y hábito en otras penitencias espirituales, de ayunos, romerías y oraciones, como a vosotros bien visto fuere. Y así conmutada, mandadle quitar el dicho hábito y soltar de la cárcel en que estuviere para que se haya y esté libremente do quisiere e por viento viere, con tanto que no sea fuera de los reinos y señoríos de Castilla y de León, y con que haga y cumpla todas las otras cosas contenidas en la sentencia que contra ella se dio y pronunció, que hasta aquí no hubiera hecho y cumplido, y fuere obligada a hacer y cumplir. Hecha en la villa de Madrid a 16 días del mes de noviembre de 1545 años. Document 3. Disabilities of Descendants of Prisoners. Don Cristóbal de Cos y Vivero, secretario del Rey Nuestro Señor del Consejo de Su Majestad de la Santa General Inquisición, por lo tocante a la corona de Castilla y de León, etc., certificó que en el día 17 del corriente mes de enero se acudió al excelentísimo señor Obispo Inquisidor General por parte del licenciado don Mariano de Santander y Álvarez, y hizo presente ser público y notorio que en año pasado de 1798 fue procesado por el Tribunal del Santo Oficio de dicha ciudad don Mariano Santander su padre, y que lo es también que no lo fue por delitos de herejía o apostasía, y sí sólo por asuntos relativos a su comercio de libros, y haberse excedido tal vez en el ejercicio de su profesión. Que el expresado tribunal, con un pleno conocimiento del proceso, manifestó en su definitiva que la formación de causa y prisión que sufrió con lo demás que en ella expresó, no le perjudicaba ni obstaba a sus hijos y descendientes para disfrutar de todos los efectos civiles de los que a consecuencia de esta decisión ha gozado sin interrupción y goza actualmente. Que sin embargo, por lo reservado de los asuntos que se tratan en el Santo Oficio, y mucho más por haberse también transpapelado con el transcurso del tiempo el certificado que de la decisión de la causa se dio por dicho tribunal al padre del exponente para su resguardo y el de sus descendientes, no era fácil, tratándose de unas pruebas formales, como necesitaba para incorporarse en el ilustre colegio de abogados de aquella Real Chancillería, hacer constar sin ningún género de duda cuanto llevaba expuesto, por lo que suplicaba se le mandase dar la correspondiente certificación de no obstancia. Y vista en el expresado consejo de su Majestad de la Santa General Inquisición, la susodicha representación con los antecedentes que obran en su archivo concernientes a la causa seguida en el Tribunal de Valladolid y determinado en el año pasado de 1798 contra don Mariano Santander, padre del exponente, por comercio ilícito de libros prohibidos. Vino en declarar y declaró en decreto de 10 y 9 de este mismo mes que la referida causa no obsta al nominado don Mariano Santander y Álvarez, ni le perjudica, como ni tampoco a sus descendientes, para obtener empleos públicos y de honra, ni para disfrutar plenamente de todos los efectos civiles, mandando se le diese certificación para su resguardo y lo demás que le convenga, en cuyo cumplimiento doy la presente sellado con la sella de la General Inquisición en Madrid, a 27 de enero de 1818. Don Cristóbal de Cos y Vivero. Document 4. Consulta of the Supreme Council of Portugal, January 17, 1619. Señor, los inquisidores de la ciudad de Coimbra y su distrito enviaron a vuestra Majestad la relación inclusa de las personas que salieron en el auto de la fe que se celebró en aquella ciudad el noviembre pasado, algunos de los cuales poco antes habían sido presos en la ciudad del puerto. Y con esta ocasión el obispo inquisidor general escribió a vuestra Majestad que sin ningún escrúpulo afirmaba que todo Portugal en la materia de judaísmo estaba contaminado, y que convenía aplicar remedio pronto para que aquellos reinos de vuestra Majestad no tuviesen los castigos que amenazaban tantas herejías, porque el judaísmo era muchísimo, los sacrilegios infinitos, canónigos presos, frailes huidos y 4 monjas inclusas en las cárceles del Santo Oficio, y que pudiera decir a vuestra Majestad que le impiden las lágrimas, y que vuelve a acordar a vuestra Majestad, acabando de celebrar, que es necesario remedio breve en que muestre vuestra Majestad su pecho católico, reformando estos males, porque no hay reino sin fe y buenas costumbres, y que a vuestra majestad le conviene no sólo tener vasallos, sino buenos vasallos, como lo dicen los santos, y que postrado a los reales pies de vuestra majestad, dice lo que entiende y lo en que ha pensado muchos tiempos ya. Todo lo que el obispo inquisidor general apunta, de cuán inficionados de judaísmo están aquellos reinos, con continuos sacrilegios y graves ofensas de Dios nuestro Señor, de que se sigue grandísimo escándalo al pueblo cristiano, es muy presente al consejo, y con el sentimiento que se debe a calidad de materia tan grave, se ha tratado muchas veces del remedio que puede haber para expurgar aquellos reinos de gente tan infiel y pertinaz, sin daño común, evitando los castigos generales y trabajos que por su respeto se entiende que padecen los mismos reinos tantos años ya. Y porque unos de los medios más adecuados para lo que tanto importa al servicio de Dios y de vuestra majestad, se busca que sería de desterrar a los cristianos nuevos, que, siendo presos por el santo oficio, fuesen condenados en perdimiento de las haciendas para el fisco, pues siendo pobres no podrán ayudar a los enemigos de vuestra majestad con gruesos caudales como ahora lo hacen. Y se escribió al marqués de Alenquer, virrey, que de parte de vuestra majestad encargase al obispo inquisidor general que tratase este punto con los del Consejo General del Santo Oficio y el modo con que se podía ejecutar, para que considerándolo todo consultasen a vuestra majestad por orden del mismo virrey lo que se les ofreciese, que como se satisfaga a esta diligencia, que debe ser con brevedad, dirá el consejo a vuestra majestad lo que le pareciere y de ella hubiere resultado. Y Mendo de la Mota propone su voto, que está muy bien considerado y tendrá entonces más propio lugar. Y porque en Portugal se hace ahora visita general del Santo Oficio, de que se ha seguido notable fruto, porque se prendieron muchos cristianos nuevos en la ciudad del puerto, particularmente 2 monjas de San Francisco y otra de San Bernardo, y en Coimbra 2 canónigos de aquella iglesia, de los cuales es uno Fernando Díaz de la Silva, que vino proveído de Roma en un canonicato y por instancias que hizo el nuncio, en nombre de su santidad. En su favor permitió a vuestra majestad que se le diese la posesión, y en Lisboa a Marcial Núñez, que era juez apostólico, de todo lo cual consta lo poco que se puede fiar de cualquiera persona de esa nación. En esa corte viven muchos de ella, naturales de Portugal, que por no ser conocidos se presume con fundamento que tienen necesidad de ser visitados por la Inquisición. Acuerda el consejo de vuestra majestad que debe mandar ordenar al Consejo General del Santo Oficio que trata de hacerlos visitar. Mendo de la Mota acrecienta que, siendo la principal obligación de vuestra majestad limpiar sus reinos de toda especie de herejía o infidelidad, y habiendo mostrado la experiencia por tan largo discurso de tiempos cuántos males ha causado en los reinos de Portugal la perfidia judaica y judaísmo, que se entiende ser una de las causas principales porque Dios le ha dado tan graves castigos. Le parece que tiene vuestra majestad obligación en ley divina y natural a mandar desterrar de sus reinos y señoríos todos aquellos que o fueren declarados por herejes o abjuraren de vehementi sospechosos en la fe, y que así lo debe vuestra majestad mandar ejecutar luego en los que han salido en este cadalso de Coimbra y en todos los demás que fueren condenados y declarados de aquí adelante por herejes, porque de lo contrario se sigue estar siempre viva la semilla del judaísmo, quedando las mismas raíces en el reino con que se aumenta y conserva. Y que además de la pureza de la religión católica a que vuestra majestad como rey está obligado, y los grandes y continuos sacrilegios que esta gente comete, profanando y injuriando los sacramentos, consideran que por sí solos bastaban para mover el católico y real ánimo de vuestra majestad ordenar así. Porque no puede dejar de estar expuesto a muchos peligros el reino que tiene dentro de sus venas humor tan pestilente, y de que nacerán crueles enemigos como son los que engendran la diferencia de religión, y que no podrá ser de ningún inconveniente irse esta gente a otros reinos extranjeros, porque como se le confisca la hacienda por el crimen de la herejía, queda tan pobre y mezquina que en ningún parte puede dar cuidado, Antes por este medio irá vuestra Majestad limpiando sus reinos poco a poco, sin hacer ningún movimiento en ellos, hasta que Dios sea servido descubrir otro camino para limpiarlos del todo. Decreto de su Majestad. En una consulta del Consejo de Portugal de 17 de enero de 1619, se trata de los de la nación hebrea que hay en aquel reino con ocasión del auto de Inquisición que se hizo el año antes en Coimbra, y uno de los puntos de esta consulta es que convendría desterrar no sólo a los que fueron declarados y condenados por herejes, sino también a los que hubieren abjurado de vehementi, y se entiende a esta segunda calidad de gente no se le confiscan los bienes por el santo oficio. Avíseme el consejo qué opinión tiene cuanto a esto, y si habrían de ser desterrados del reino, aun en caso que no se les confiscan los bienes, pues en él sería forzoso que saliendo del reino sacasen también sus bienes, cosa en que parece hay razones para reparar, no siendo este remedio obligatorio y necesario en conciencia, que siéndolo claro está que se ha de vencer cualquier inconveniente que se pudiese representar. En otro de los puntos trata el Consejo de Portugal que convendría visitar expresamente todos los de la nación que de aquel reino hubiesen pasado a los de Castilla, y para hacer esta visita es necesario que el Inquisidor General o Consejo de la Inquisición de Portugal envíe una lista de los cristianos nuevos de aquel reino que andan por Castilla, y si algunos de ellos tuviere sobre sí causas de particular sospecho en materia de la fe, lo apunten en la margen, y se me enviarán las cartas para el Inquisidor General de Portugal en forma y por la vía que se suele, para que yo las firme, y en lo demás que contiene la dicha consulta quedo mirando para responder a ella. Rey. End of section 67.
Section 68 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lee. Document 5. Cases of heresy tried by the Tribunal of Valencia between 1455 and 1592. Archivo Histórico Nacional, Inquisición de Valencia, Legajo 98. See page 345. Year: 1455. Cases 3. 1461, 7. 1482, 11. 1485, 19. 1486, 14. 1487, 15. 1488, 18. 1489, 20. 1490, 28. 1491, 51. 1492, 6. 1493, 4. 1494, 10. 1495, 10. 1496, 15. 1497, 24. 1499, 15. 1500, 35. 1501, 36. 1502, 9. 1503, 11. 1505, 31. 1506, 20. 1507, 7. 1508, 14. 1509, 26. 1510, 10. 1511, 12. 1512, 32. 1513, 41. 1514, 63. 1515, 34. 1516, 41. 1517, 25. 1518, 21. 1519, 22. 1520, 36. 1521, 31. 1522, 40. 1523, 37. 1524, 40. 1526, 47. 1528, 42. 1529, 44. 1530, 20. 1531, 58. 1532, 1. 1533, 61. 1534, 25. 1535, 2. 1536, 39. 1537, 69. 1538, 112. 1539, 79. 1540, 53. 1544, 79. 1545, 37. 1546, 49. 1547, 12. 1548, 15. 1549, 4. 1558, 2. 1560, 15. 1563, 62. 1564, 38. 1565, 66. 1566, 41. 1567, 54. 1568, 68. 1570, 16. 1571, 55. 1572, 32. 1573, 34. 1574, 16. 1575, 20. 1576, 16. 1577, 13. 1578, 15. 1579, 24. 1580, 37. 1581, 22. 1583, 8. 1584, 29. 1586, 64. 1587, 35. 1588, 21. 1589, 94. 1590, 49. 1591, 270. 1592, 117, amounting in all to 3,125 cases. In Legajo 300 of the same archives, there is a list of relaxations in Valencia from 1486 to 1593. As customary in these registers, it is arranged alphabetically under the baptismal names, and is unfortunately incomplete, ending with the letter N. From other similar lists, it appears that the letters A through N comprise substantially 4/5 of the whole, and therefore if 25% be added to these figures, it will probably give a close approximation to the whole number. Arranged chronologically, it presents the following results. Year 1486. Relaxed in person 10. 1487. Relaxed in person 10. 1489. Relaxed in person 8. 1490. Relaxed in person 18. 1492. Relaxed in person 12. 1493. Relaxed in person 18. 1496. Relaxed in effigy absent 1. 1497. Relaxed in person 4. In effigy absent 79. 1498. Relaxed in person 1. In effigy absent 28. 1499. Relaxed in effigy absent 63. 1500. Relaxed in person 3. 1501. Relaxed in person 15. 1502. Relaxed in person 13. 1503. Relaxed in person 4. 1505. Relaxed in person 13. In effigy dead 51. 1506. Relaxed in person 4. Relaxed in effigy dead 22. 1508. Relaxed in effigy dead 48. 1509. Relaxed in person 12. Relaxed in effigy dead 3. 1510. Relaxed in person 9. In effigy absent 4. In effigy dead 10. 1511. Relaxed in effigy dead 32. 1512. Relaxed in person 1. In effigy dead 8. 1513. Relaxed in person 12. In effigy dead 1. 1514. Relaxed in person 52. Relaxed in effigy dead 8. 1517. Relaxed in person 4. In effigy dead 6. 1520. relaxed in person, 27. 1521, relaxed in person, 8. In effigy absent, 3. 1522, relaxed in person, 6. 1523, relaxed in person, 8. 1524, relaxed in person, 13. 1526, in person, 15. 1528, in person, 23. 1529, in person, 24. 1530, in person, 1. 1531, in person, 37. 1533, in person, 8. 1536, in person, 12. 1537, in person, 1. 1538, in person, 11. 1539, in person, 4. 1540, in person, 4. 1544, in person, 3. 1545, in person, 3. 1553, in person, 1. 1554, in person, 15. 1563, in person, 6. 1564, in person, 3. In effigy absent, 1. In effigy dead, 1. 1566, in person, 3. 1567, in person, 4. 1568, in person, 2. 1571, in person, 1. 1572, in person, 5. 1573, in person, 3. 1574, in person, 7. 1575, in person, 2. In effigy absent, 1. 1576, in person, 1. In effigy absent, 1. Dead, 1. 1577, in person, 5. 1578, in person, 3. In effigy dead, 1. 1579, in person, 1. 1581, in person, 1. In effigy absent, 1. 1583, in person, 4. In effigy absent, 1. 1584, in person, 2. 1586, in person, 3. In effigy dead, 2. 1590, in person, 1. In effigy absent, 2. Dead, 1. 1592, relaxed in person, 6. In effigy absent, 4. 1593, relaxed in person, 5. The aggregate of this list is 515 relaxed in person and 383 in effigy, of whom 189 were fugitives and 194 were dead. If to these figures we add 25% for the missing portion of the record, we shall have 644 relaxations in person and 479 in effigy as the result of 108 years of the most active period of the Tribunal of Valencia. End of section 68.
Section 69 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Pamela Nagami. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lee. Book 8, Document 6. Brief of Clement VII to Inquisitor General Manrique, July 15, 1531, respecting Lutheranism. Bulario del Orden de Santiago, Libro Primero, de Copias, folio 98. See page 423. Dilecto filio Alfonso Manrique, Sancti Calixti, Presbitero, Cardinali Hispalensi, non cupato, Clemens Papa Pontifex Septimus. Dilecte filii, salutem et apostolicam benedictionem, cum sicut veridica relatione ad nostri apostolatus auditum displicenter pervenet propter libros errores lutheranos contenentes, qui ad loca castelle et legiones ac Aragonum regnorum et dominiorum carissimi in Christo Filii nostri caroli Romanorum imperatoris semper Augusti, qui etiam Hispaniarum rex existit delati fuerunt, damnata heresis Lutherana in aliquibus locis regnorum et dominiorum predictorum pullulare coeperet et ad praesens varia, et erronea iniquitatis filii erisiarchi Martini Lutheri dogmata iamusque ad Deo invaluerunt et indictis regnis et dominiis multi reperiantur, qui uius modi errores et dogmata imitent et publicent ac tales libros vendant, et non nulli uius modi erroribus infecti sancte matris ecclesiae precepta contemnant, ac sanctorum patrum decreta parvi facienda mendaciter afferment, et multas blasphemias in omnipotentam Deum eiusque gloriosam genetricem intemertam semperque Virginem Mariam ac Santos Dei proferant et varios hereses introducant ac diversos errores committant in gravissimam divinae majestatis offensam, et catholicae et orthodoxe fidei scandalum et auctoritatis apostolicae enervationem ac animarum salutis perniciam, et irreparabile detrimentum, nos quorum est pro salute gregis Dominici, huic nefarie heresi, ne in deteriora procedat omni, quo possumus remedio accurere, ac ilius spectatores debita, actatione et correctione compescere. Circumspectione tue, quae ecclesia Hispalensi, ex concessione et dispensatione apostolica prese dignoscitur et inquisitur generalis in partibus illis existit, et de cuius prudentia et rectitudine specialem in Domino fiduciam obstinemus, contra quoscumque cuiuscumque status gradus ordinis et conditionis seu preeminentiae existant equacumque ecclesiastica episcopali et archiepiscopali dignitate seu mundana etiam ducali auctoritate prefulgeant ipsius Martini et aliorum erroniorum dogmatam sectatores sequaces fautores et defensores aut illis auxilium consilium et favorum directe vel indirecte publice vel accolte prestantes auctoritate nostra inquirendi a cuius modi lave infectos non tamen episcopos et archiepiscopos capiendi et carceribus mancipandi, nec non iuxta canonicas sanctiones et sanctorum patrum instituta, prut qualitas exgessuum exegerit vel conscientiae fuerit, et videbitur expedire puniendi, et ad cor redire nolentes addicte ecclesiae communione, veluti putrida membra separatos et divisos esse ac damnationi aeterne cum Satana et angelis eius addictos et perpetuo infames et intestabiles esse, et corpora eorum postquam defuncti fuerent sepultura ecclesiastica carere debere denuntiandi et declarandi, et si ad veritatis lumen redire et uius modi eresim abjurare voluerunt, etiam si archiepiscopi et episcopi fuerunt, postquam erroram suam deposuerent acte premissis doluerent, idque humiliter petierent, si alias relapsi non fuerunt, ab omnibus et singulis excommunicationis, suspensionis et interdicti aliisque ecclesiasticis sententiis, censuris et penes quas premissorum occasione quo modo libet incurrerent, et ab uius modi excessibus delictis et criminibus in forma ecclesiae consueta absolvendi, et super irregularitate quomodo libet contracta dispensandi, omnemque inhabilitatis et infamiae notam sive maculam penitus absolvendi, ac eios rehabilitandi, et ad nostrum et sedis apostolicae gremium nec non gratiam et benedictionem restituendi et reponendi omniaque, et singula aliaque ad uius modi pestem reprimendem, et radiciter extirpandam necessaria et opportuna esse digno juntur et ad officium inquisitorus, tam de jure quam consuetudine pertinent, etque tibi et aliis inquisitoribus generalibus in partibus illis pro tempore deputatis, tam per quoscunque Romanos pontifices predecessores nostros quam per nos quo modo libet concessasent, faciendi, ordinandi, et exequendi ac auxilium, brachiis saeculares invocandi et ad premissa omnia, et singula si et quando expedire videres viros aptos et idoneos cum simili aut limitata facultate subdeligandi et deputandi ipsosque quotiens eis opportunam videbitur, revocandi ac loco ipsorum alio similiter idoneos deputandi plenum et liberam auctoritate apostolica tenore praesentium facultatum concedimus, non abstantibus fere Bonifacii pape octavus predecessoris nostri de una e concilii generalis, de duabis dietis et aliis apostolicis constitionibus contrariis quibus cumque auci Lutheranis adherentibus fautoribus receptoribus et aliis prefatis vel quibus vis aliis communiter vel divisim addicta sit sede indultum quad interdici suspendi vel excommunicari aut extra vel ultra certa loca ad judicium evocari non possent per litteras apostolicas non facientes plenem et expressam acte indulto uius modi mentionem, et quibus libet aliis privilegiis et litteris tam apostolicis quam regularibus sub quibus cumque tenoribus singulis prefatis concessis, perque praesentiam literarum et vestre jurisdictionis in premissis executio quomodo libet impediri vel deferi possetque quoad hoc ipsis vel alicui ipsorum nulla tenus suffragari posse, nec debere decernimus, data Rome apud sanctum Petrum sub annulo piscatoris die quintus decimus Julii 1531 pontificatus nostre anno octavo Evangelista. End of section 69.
Section 70 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ronaldo. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lee. Documents 7 and 8. Document 7. Letter of Charles V to Inquisitor General Valdez from Brussels, January the 25th, 1550. Eraso nos mostró la relación que enviastes de lo sucedido sobre el derrocamiento de aquellas casas de Valladolid, y por lo que los del Consejo de la Inquisición nos han consultado, lo habemos entendido más particularmente. Y cierto, ello ha sido de cualidad que se pudiera llevar por otros términos, y no ponerse este negocio tan adelante porque de ello no puede haberse seguido ningún buen fruto. Y los reyes de Bohemia, mis hijos, me han escrito lo que habían mandado proveer sobre todo, y parece que aquello está bien porque si se hubiere de pasar más adelante, no pudiera ser sin notable inconveniente, y porque no sucedan semejantes cosas, se provee que se ponga en ejecución lo que ordenamos los días pasados, y se nos envía relación de ello junto con lo que parecerá para que se tome algún término en estos negocios, y se terna el respeto que es razón a lo tocante al santo oficio. De los que nombrasteis en el memorial pasado, habemos elegido para la plaza de la Inquisición, que está vaca por Cortes, al licenciado Otalora. Encargámosos le deis luego el despacho en la forma que se acostumbra. La provisión de las iglesias que están vacas aún no se ha hecho. Cuando se trataré de ello, se mirará en lo que nos habéis escrito, cerca de la perpetuidad de los salarios de los inquisidores y otros oficiales, pues que están muy cargados de pensión. En lo del doctor Egidio, ¿acaso han visto las proposiciones que contra él resultaron, y lo que últimamente tomaron a escribir los inquisidores de Sevilla? Y pues os halláis en esa ciudad, encargámosos proveáis que se averigue muy bien la verdad, y con la más brevedad que ser pueda, y se nos consulte lo que parecerá en su causa antes que se determine, porque de una manera o de otra conviene al servicio de Dios y nuestro que aquella iglesia sea de prelado, y porque fray Domingo de Soto nos habló algunas veces en este negocio, diciendo lo que cerca de él le escribisteis, por lo que se le mostraron las escrituras que enviaron los del consejo, y por esta causa y sus letras y doctrina, creemos que convenía que entendiese en las calificaciones de este negocio, pareciéndose así, proveeréis que se le comuniquen. Después de esto, escribe Eraso, que podría ser que con haber vacado lo de Santiago hubiese más comodidad para esto. Document 8. Letter of Inquisitor General Valdez to Paul IV, September 9, 1558. Para su santidad. Santísimo Padre, no he escrito antes a vuestra santidad de los herejes luteranos que en estas partes nuevamente se han descubierto, por pensar que siendo los negocios, como son de muy gran importancia, convenía primero hacerse las diligencias que se han hecho para descubrir más en ellos, y aunque parezca que ha habido alguna dilación en esto, suplico a vuestra santidad no lo atribuya a culpa de descuido, ni de otra cosa, sino al deseo que yo y los ministros del Santo Oficio, que tratamos estas cosas, tenemos en cumplir con toda vigilancia lo que es a nuestra cargo en servicio de Dios y descargo de vuestra santidad, a quien humildemente suplico se acuerde de mandar las cosas que tocaren al servicio de vuestra santidad y de su santa sede apostólica con la confianza que merece mi deseo y fidelidad de hijo, y siervo muy obediente, y que siempre tenga memoria de favorecer las cosas del Santo Oficio, con la afición y voluntad que lo ha hecho para que en tiempo de su felicísimo pontificado se extirpen las herejías y se aumente la fe católica y religión cristiana, como espero en Dios será así. Y por no cansar a vuestra santidad con larga carta, me remito a la relación que va con esta por mano del deán de Oviedo y de Juan de Bedoya, que tienen cargo en esa corte de los negocios del oficio de la Santa Inquisición de las provincias que están a mi carga. Guarde Dios la muy santa persona de vuestra beatitud por muchos años para su servicio y buen gobierno de su Iglesia. En Valladolid, 9 de septiembre 1558. Sanctitas Vestra Servus Humilis Efec Hispanens. La relación que se envió con la carta a su santidad. Después que se ha tenido noticia de las herejías y errores de Lutero y sus secuaces, y se han extendido por muchas partes de la cristianidad, la provincia que por la gracia de Dios más libre ha estado de esta mácula ha sido los riñones de España, por el gran cuidado y vigilancia de los ministros del Santo Oficio de la Inquisición, aunque algunos pocos naturales y otros extranjeros de ellos han sido convencidos y condenados por herejes de estos errores, y ejecutados en sus personas las penas que merecían en los que han podido ser habidos, y contra otras que se han ausentado se ha procedido en rebeldía, y han sido condenados en su ausencia y contumacia. Ha sucedido de un año a esta parte, poco más o menos, que como los inquisidores de Sevilla, por ciertos avisos y indicios que tuvieron, comenzaron a inquirir y a hacer diligencias contra ciertas personas de aquella ciudad, y esto vino a noticia de unos frailes del monasterio de Santi Isidro, extramuros de ella, que son de la orden de los ermitaños de Santo Jerónimo, y entendieron ser culpados, luego se ausentaron del monasterio y del arzobispado y del reino, y entendiese que están en Almaña, los nombres de los cuales van en una memoria cuesta con esta, y de los que quedaron en el monasterio están presos en la Inquisición de Sevilla 8 frailes, demás de otras personas sus cómplices. A esta sazón que esto acaeció, supose también como era venido a Sevilla un hombre español llamado Julián, que venía de Almaña, y traía cartas de un hereje que allá está desto reino, llamado Juan Pérez, para ciertas personas principales de aquella ciudad, y que también había traído muchos libros de herejes, ansí en latín como en lengua española, y los había repartido por ciertas personas que se los pagaban bien. Este hombre fue avisido y encubierto, y persuadido que luego se ausentase, porque los inquisidores lo sabrían y le quemarían. Y ansí se ausentó, de manera que por buena diligencia de los inquisidores fue preso en la Sierra Morena, 30 leguas de Sevilla, a donde fue traído y está preso, el cual, aunque al principio muchos días estuvo muy pertinaz en sus herejías, y dijo de otras muchas personas, ya parece que muestra arrepentimiento y que quiere reducirse a la Iglesia católica. De la prisión de este y de los otros han resultado otras muchas prisiones que se han hecho y están presos, y otras se espera que lo estarán en Sevilla y su comarca. Entiéndese que toda la mayor parte del daño que se ha hallado en Sevilla resultó de algunos compañeros y devotos del doctor Egidio, canónigo de la magistral de aquella iglesia ya defunto, que fue admitido el año de 53 a apuración de muchos errores que tuvo cerca de estas materias, aunque según se sospecha, falsa y fingidamente, y que engañó a los inquisidores, de manera que quedaron muchos inficionados de su ponzoña, en que hay personas principales ilustres y letrados, los cuales hasta ahora hay ahí presos, demás de los frailes de Sant Isidro, versean por la memoria que va con esta. Demás de lo dicho, habrá 5 o 6 meses que por ciertos indicios y avisos que el Inquisidor General y el Consejo e Inquisidores tuvieron, se entendió que en Valladolid, Salamanca, Zamora, Toro, Palencia, Logroño, se dogmatizaban muy secretamente malas doctrinas de los errores luteranos, y aunque la averiguación y inquisición de esto se comenzó a hacer con toda la disimulación y secreto posible, no dejó de venir la noticia de algunos de los culpados, entre los cuales fue fray Domingo de Rojas, fraile y predicador de la Orden de Santo Domingo, hijo del marqués de Poza, y don Carlos de Seso, que huyeron con toda diligencia, el fraile en hábito seglar, y fueron presos en Navarra, adonde ya tenían salvoconducto para se pasar en Francia, como lo hicieran si la buena diligencia de la Inquisición no los previniera, enviando por todos los puertos y pasos de los confines de los reinos de España, ansí marítimos como de la tierra, fueron traídos a la Inquisición de Valladolid, adonde está la corte y reside el Inquisidor General y Consejo de Inquisición. Y se han prendido, y están presos otros muchos cómplices, ansí personas principales e ilustres y letrados, cuyos nombres van en el memorial. Y sus causas y procesos se oyen y prosiguen con todo cuidado y diligencia, porque demás de los inquisidores que de asiento residen en la Inquisición de Valladolid, el Inquisidor General ha proveído que 2 de los del Consejo que asisten con él vayan cada día, mañana y tarde, a la audiencia de las cárceles a oír a los presos y tomar sus confesiones y proveer lo necesario, y por ser los presos muchos y las causas y personas tan calificadas, se ha mandado venir otros inquisidores y oficiales de otros partidos, para que todos juntos se ayuden para la brevedad y buena expedición de los negocios. Y conclusos los procesos, está acordado que se llamen prelados y letrados teólogos, y juristas de los mejores y de más autoridad, que se hallaren para que juntamente con los inquisidores los vean y determinen conforme a derecho y a la calidad y gravedad de cada uno. Hanse enviado inquisidores que hagan diligencia en Salamanca, Torro, Zamora, Palencia, Logroño, y en otros lugares, donde los principales dogmatistas y culpados, cuestan presos, han frecuentado más sus comunicaciones, de que se presume han hecho mucho daño. Y a Sevilla se envió el obispo de Tarazona, que ha sido inquisidor muchos años, para que, como persona de experiencia y de la dignidad que tiene, asista con los inquisidores y personas que entienden en los negocios de allá, y dé color y autoridad a lo que allí se hiciere. Demás de lo que el Inquisidor General y el Consejo de la Inquisición ayudan de la corte con todo el cuidado y diligencia posible por la autoridad real, porque la majestad imperial y real y la serenísima princesa en su nombre han hecho toda demostración y dado todo favor, ansí con sus cartas y provisiones, como socorriendo con 10.000 ducados para los gastos que se han hecho y hacen, porque del oficio no había un maravedí, que aun para las prisiones de los que se habían ausentado fue necesario que el arzobispo inquisidor general lo proviese de su cámara. Puesto que se han hecho las diligencias posibles en que no se vendan ni se traigan a estos reinos libros prohibidos, que han sido la principal causa de este daño, y se han hecho censuras de ellos, todavía los herejes que están en Almaña y en otras partes, que parece han tenido correspondencia con algunos de estos partes, han tenido forma para meterlos. Y para que en el remedio de esto haya más vigilancia, y que la comunicación de extranjeros de provincias dañadas no hagan más daño en estas, se da orden que vayan y residan inquisidores con sus oficiales por las costas de la mar y lugares donde suele haber concurso de tractantes y gentes de la calidad que está dicho. Y aunque al principio que se instituyó el oficio de la Santa Inquisición en estos reinos, en tiempo de los reyes católicos de gloriosa memoria, había inquisiciones con todos los oficiales que eran menester para inquisición formada casi en cada obispado. Y como iban disminuyendo las confiscaciones de las haciendas de los condenados, con que se pagaban los oficiales, se iban también acortando el número de las inquisiciones hasta que quedó en las pocas que ahora son. Que hay inquisición que tiene en su partido 15 obispados, y aun para los oficiales que en ella residen, no hay con qué cumplir los salarios tenues que les están señalados. Que no ha sido de poco inconveniente para la autoridad del Santo Oficio, y aun de algún escrúpulo para los que tratamos. Y aunque algunas veces se ha puesto en práctica por los sumos pontíficos pasados, el remedio de esto no se ha dado, créese que por negligencia de los que solicitaron. Y según el tiempo es tan peligroso de las herejías que se han levantado, parece muy conveniente y necesario que se acrecentasen más inquisiciones como al principio las había, y que los salarios fuesen para poder sostener los oficiales y se perpetuasen, lo cual se podría hacer fácilmente mandando su sanctitud aplicar algunas rentas eclesiásticas que sirven de poco fruto a la Iglesia de Dios, y sería mejor empleado en sostenerse la Inquisición, que ha andado y anda muy quebrantado por falta de esto. Y aunque en todos estos negocios se entiende con toda la diligencia posible, no sabemos en qué parará para adelante si el Santo Oficio de la Inquisición no tiene de qué se sostener. El remedio de lo cual se espera de su santidad, según la afición y cuidado particular ha tenido siempre y tiene de hacer merced y favor al Santo Oficio. Considerado bien estos negocios, parece que no dejan de tener el principio de más lejos, y que las herejías que el maestro Juan de Oría fue acusado, y los errores que vinieron, los cuales llamaban alumbrados o dejados, naturales de Guadalajara y de otros lugares del reino de Toledo y de otras partes, eran de la simiente de estas herejías luteranas, sino que los inquisidores que en aquel tiempo conocieron de aquellas causas, no estaban prácticos de estos errores luteranos, para usar de la ejecución que conviniere hacerse con más rigor, lo cual y haber ido algunos de los culpados a Roma, y haber hallado allí buena acogida, y dispensando con ellos, les dieron ocasión de atreverse a ser pertinaces en sus errores, y dejar sucesión de ellos. Como también se ha entendido que de haberse admitido el doctor Egidio a reconciliación, el año de 53, por no alcanzar los jueces los inconvenientes que para adelante se representan con la experiencia en las cosas desta cualidad, como está dicho, ha sucedido el daño que ahora se descubre en Sevilla, por ser los principales culpados de los que fueron apasionados y aficionados y secuaces del doctor Egidio, de quien les quedó el lenguaje de sus errores y falsa doctrina. Asimismo se tiene entendido que algunos prelados y frailes y otras personas particulares en estos reinos tienen libros prohibidos de autores herejes y de errores luteranos, y aunque se han publicado las censuras que por el Santo Oficio están proveídas y discernidas para que no los tengan y los exhiban a los oficiales que para esto están nombrados por el Santo Oficio, no los dejan de tener diciendo que tienen facultad y licencia apostólica para ello. Y demás del peligro que podría suceder en los que los tienen en leerlos, como se entiende que de leerse han dañado algunos letrados y otras personas, es también de mucho peligro que algunos de los que los tienen dejan libremente leerlos a los de su casa y personas que entran en ella. Según se tiene relación de ello, convendría que su santidad proveyese revocando por su breve todas las licencias y facultades que se han dado para tener libros prohibidos por la Iglesia católica y por el Santo Oficio, mandando con graves penas que no los tengan, y que los que tienen los entreguen luego al Santo Oficio, y que pueda proceder con todo rigor contra los que hicieran lo contrario, e imponiendo grandes censuras y excomunión late sentencie a los confesores, así curas, frailes, como otros cualesquier sacerdotes, hagan preguntas particulares a los penitentes si tienen libros prohibidos o de mala doctrina, o si saben o hayan oído quien los tenga, o hayan dicho alguna cosa contra nuestra santa fe católica, o contra lo que tiene la Santa Madre Iglesia de Roma, y que los que hallaren que algo de esto tienen o saben, no los asuelvan, sino que vayan a decirlo a la Inquisición, porque del descuido o malicia de algunos confesores se entiende que ha habido mucho daño socolor de corrección fraterna, y no parece que deja de ser de mucho inconveniente la cláusula que en las bulas de cruzada y otras bulas se concede facultad de poder elegir confesor cual quisieren, porque con esto no pueden tener buena cuenta los curados de sus parroquianos. Atento lo cual, y que estos errores y herejías que se han comenzado a dogmatizar y sembrar de Lutero y sus secuaces en España, han sido en manera de sedición o motín, y entre personas principales ha sido en linaje, religión y hacienda, como en deudos principales, de quien hay gran sospecha que podrían suceder mayores daños, si se usase con ellos de la benignidad que se ha usado en el Santo Oficio con los convertidos de la ley de Moisés y de la secta de Mohammed, que comúnmente han sido gente baja y de quien no se temía alteración ni escándalo en el reino, como se podría tener o sospechar en los culpados destas materias luteranas. Así por lo ya dicho, como por ser materia de libertad de obligaciones y preceptos de la Iglesia, que el pueblo tiene por pesados, y se aficionaría fácilmente a libertarse, y podría ser que los inquisidores apostólicos y consultores, y también los ordinarios, que han de ser llamados para la determinación de los negocios, o algunos de ellos al tiempo de votar y sentenciar los procesos, tuviesen algún escrúpulo de relajar al brazo seglar alguno de los culpados que serían personas de calidad para admitirlos a misericordia, se sospecha que no cumplirían las penitencias o cárceles que les fuesen impuestas con la humildad y paciencia que lo suelen hacer las otras personas de más baja suerte, y por la calidad de las tales personas y de sus deudos podrían suceder mayores inconvenientes y escándalos ansí en lo de la religión como en lo de la pública paz y sosiego del reino. Y por todo esto convendría mucho que su santidad concediese y mandase por un breve a los inquisidores apostólicos y consultores que sin temor ni escrúpulo de irregularidad ni de otra cosa pudiesen relajar y relajasen al brazo seglar hacia las personas culpadas, de quien verosimilmente se pudiese temer o sospechar alteración en la república cristiana o perturbación de la paz y quietud del reino, como a los dogmatistas de estas herejías y a los que principalmente fueren culpados en quien a los jueces pareciere conveniente usar de la ejecución de la justicia ejemplar, aunque fuesen personas constituidas en cualquier dignidad seglar o pontifical y eclesiástica, y de cualquier orden, hábito y religión y estado que sean, conociendo de sus causas y procediendo contra ellos a captura y ejecución de sus sentencias, dando a los dichos inquisidores y consultores libre poder y albedrío para usar del rigor que la calidad de los negocios y tiempos y del temor de lo contrario de ellos para lo futuro lo requiere, y que se puedan extender etiam ultra terminos juris communis. Algunos años ya que en estas inquisiciones no se hallaran culpados sino muy pocos de los errores de la ley de Moisés. Hasta ahora de pocos días acá que en la Inquisición de Murcia se han descubierto muchas personas culpadas en esto del judaísmo, y aunque de algunos se ha hecho justicia en un acto solemne que ahí se celebró de la fe, están presos y para prenderse otras muchas personas de calidad que no es de menos importancia que los otros negocios que se ofrecen. Asimismo ha habido y hay mucho en que entender con los nuevos convertidos de moros de los reinos de Castilla, Granada, Aragón y Valencia, que por vivir libremente en la seta de Mahoma se pasaban a Berbería, y los más de los que quedaban no dejaban de guardar las ceremonias de la dicha secta. Hase dado la mejor orden que ha sido posible, para más asegurarlos de que han de ser tratados con clemencia como pareció que convenía para su quietud y para su enmienda y buena instrucción y doctrina cristiana, para que cesen las ofensas que cometían contra Dios nuestro Señor con su mal vivir y para justificar la ejecución de la justicia y castigo que se hiciere en los culpados. End of section 70.
Section 71 of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lee. Document 9. Expulsion of English and Scotch Protestants in 1625. Señor, luego que por el año de 1605 se hicieron las paces entre el señor rey don Felipe III, padre de vuestra majestad, que santa gloria haya, y serenísimos archiduques con los reinos de Inglaterra y Escocia, para que los capítulos de ellas pertenecientes al comercio tuviesen efecto, precediendo permisión de su santidad, pareció conveniente ordenar que no fuesen molestados las personas que de los dichos reinos de Inglaterra y Escocia pasasen a los de vuestra majestad, por razón de la conciencia y religión, como con efecto se mandó a las inquisiciones de estos reinos, sólo con fin de asegurar más la contratación y paz, y habiéndose rompido, como es notorio, sin causa ni razón, por los dichos reinos de Inglaterra, tomando las armas contra los de vuestra majestad, cesan las causas de la permisión que su santidad dio en consideración de las paces, y me hallo obligado en conciencia a procurar obviar los inconvenientes y daños que pueden resultar a los católicos de la comunicación y trato con tan perniciosos y pertinaces herejes como son los naturales de aquellos reinos, no permitiendo que vivan ni estén en estos de vuestra majestad, y lo contrario será contravenir a la voluntad de su santidad y faltar yo a las obligaciones de fiel vasallo de vuestra majestad. Y de mi oficio y para cumplir con todo he ordenado que se publique un edicto en esta corte y en las ciudades y lugares principales de estos reinos, para que todos los naturales de los de Inglaterra y Escocia, que no fueren católicos y reconocieren a la Santa Iglesia Católica Romana, salgan dentro de 20 días de todos los reinos y señoríos de vuestra majestad, con apercebimiento que pasado el dicho término serán castigados por el santo oficio los transgresores, y de hacerlo así resulta muy gran servicio a Dios y beneficio a estos reinos, donde la santa fe católica se ha conservado en su pureza mediante el santo celo y vigilancia de vuestra majestad, y los señores reyes sus predecedores, y por ser negocio grave y de que es razón tenga vuestra majestad noticia, no lo he querido executar sin dar de ello cuento primero a vuestra majestad, que en todo mandara lo que fuere servido. En Madrid, 9 de noviembre de 1625, señalada del ilustrísimo señor Inquisidor General. End of Document 9. Document 10. Edict of Prohibition of a Book. Carta para remitir edictos. Con esta se le remite el edicto incluso en que se prohíben los papeles y libros que en él se mencionan, y así, en recibiéndole el primer día de domingo o fiesta de guardar, le hará publicar al ofertorio de la misa conventual que se dijere en la parroquial de la villa o lugar, y un tanto del autorizado del notario se pondrá a las puertas principales de dicha parroquial, y le remitirá original a los lugares que se contienen a la margen. Y esto se dice cuando se remite el mismo a otras partes y se le ponen los lugares a la margen, y se firma dicha carta de los señores inquisidores y se refrenda de un secretario. Cuando se le remite algún expurgatorio, se le dice al comisario que ante 2 religiosos los más doctos, y si no hubiere 2 sacerdotes, haga el expurgatorio al tenor del que se le remite, y que pongan el principio de los que expurgare y borrare como los expurgó en tantos de tal mes y año. Edicto en que se prohíben libros. Nos, los inquisidores apostólicos contra la herética pravedad y apostasía en todo el reino de Navarra, obispado de Calahorra y la Calzada y de su distrito, etc., hacemos saber a todos y cualesquier personas de cualquier estado, preeminencia y condición que sean, exentos y non exentos de nuestro distrito, que al servicio de Dios nuestro Señor, bien y utilidad de nuestra santa fe católica y religión cristiana, conviene y es necesario se recojan y prohíban un totum de libros y papeles siguientes. Primeramente, aquí se ponen los libros que se prohíben y acabado se dice: por tanto, por el temor de las presentes, mandamos so pena de excomunión mayor latae sentiae, trina canónica municione premisa, y de cada 50.000 maravedis para gasto del santo oficio, que ninguna persona en cuyo poder se hallaren dichos libros o papeles no pueda leer los manuscriptos ni impresos de los dichos ni de otras cualesquier impresiones, venderlos ni imprimirlos de nuevo, antes bien dentro de tercero día los traigan a este santo oficio, o los entreguen al comisario en cuyo distrito se hallare, con apercibimiento que lo no haciendo dentro del dicho término, procederemos contra los que rebeldes fueren por todo rigor del derecho, como contra personas inobedientes a los mandamientos y censuras del santo oficio, dado en la Inquisición de Logroño a... Firman los señores inquisidores y referéndalo un secretario y se escribe en papel a lo ancho. End of Document 10. Document 11. Commission for the Examination of Libraries. Nos, don Fernando de Valdés, por la divina miseración, arzobispo de Sevilla, etc., confiando de las letras y recta conciencia de vos, el reverendo licenciado Martín del Pozo, provisor en el obispado de Tarazona, y que bien y diligentemente haréis lo que por nos vos fuere encomendado, por el tenor de la presente vos damos poder y facultad para que podáis visitar y visitéis todas las librerías de cualesquier libreros, monasterios, universidades y personas particulares que están y residen en todo el distrito del dicho obispado, para ver si hay algunos libros heréticos, sospechosos y escandalosos, ansí de los contenidos en el catálogo de los libros reprobados, como de los que contengan en sí algún error o sospecha de él, y mandamos a todos y cualesquier personas de cualquier estado, orden y religión y cualidad que sean, que vos muestren y dejen ver las dichas sus librerías y libros que tuvieren para el dicho efecto, lo cual hagan y cumplan so pena de sentencia de excomunión mayor late sentencie y de 200 ducados de oro a cada uno que lo contrario hiciere para los gastos del santo oficio, y los reprobados sospechosos o malsonantes que hallaredes y las informaciones que recibiéredes contra las personas que tuvieren los dichos libros, las remitid a los reverendos inquisidores de Zaragoza, para que vista hagan en el dicho negocio justicia, para lo cual todo vos damos el dicho nuestro poder y cometemos nuestras veces. Dada en Valladolid a 13 días de abril, año 1559, F. Hispalens, por mandado de su señor ilustrísimo Pedro de Tapia. End of Document 11. Document 12. License to read a Bible in Italian. Nos, don Juan Tavera, Inquisidor General contra la herética pravedad de los reinos y señoríos de su majestad, etc., por cuanto por parte de vos la muy ilustre señora duquesa de Soma nos ha ido pedido que se vos diese licencia de tener Biblia traducida en vulgar toscano y leer en ella, confiando de vuestro buen celo y devoción, vos damos licencia y facultad para que tengáis la dicha Biblia en toscano y leáis en ella por espacio y término de un año, no embargante cualquier prohibición que, en contrario, sea fecha sin caer ni incurrir por ella en pena alguna, en testimonial de lo cual mandamos dar la presente firmada de nuestro nombre y refrendado del secretario de la General Inquisición. Dada en la Villa de Madrid a 20 de febrero de 1543 años, y cardinalis, por mandado de su ilustrísima y reverendísima señoría Hierónimo Zurita. End of Document 12. End of A History of the Inquisition of Spain, Volume 3, by Henry Charles Lea.